The story I'm going to share with you took place in the North Pole, Alaska, May 20. The incident I'm going to describe was the wrong place, wrong time, and completely unprovoked. Another note, I was still only 20 when this incident occurred, and could not legally own a pistol yet. Also, I was in the army, and if you live in the barracks, you have to keep your weapons in the arms room. So it's not like it's convenient to get that out and carry it, as compared to a guy living off post who can keep his gun in his safe or in his closet. Anyway, it's on the night of Cinco de Mayo 20. I attended a party at a friend's house in the North Pole, AK. North Pole is about 20 or 30 minutes outside of Fairbanks. It is a somewhat rural area and community. Lots of houses at acre or 1 or 2 acre lot, mostly dirt roads off of the main roads. I was designated driver that drove 4 of my friends, but 3 of the friends I brought decided that they're going to spend the rest of the night at that person's house instead of going back to the barracks. Only one friend that wasn't drinking a lot decided he wanted to go back to the barracks when I was ready to go. We ended up leaving at about 1:30 AM. As we're pulling out in the front gate, I got a call that there had been a fight at the party. They said that after the fight, everyone was going home instead of staying the night and continued drinking. They said to me, can you come back and pick them up? But said they had to go in a different friend's house that lived in the same area because everyone had to leave after the fight. Well, the GPS doesn't work that well once you get out of Fairbanks and onto the main roads. You could get in the general area, but not the exact location. When we went to the address that was given, it came up as being in the middle of the road, so we took a turn down a side road to turn around and try and get service so that we could make a call to figure out where the house was. By this time it's around 2:30 AM. As we turn down the road, there's an old red minivan with fog lights mounted on the top just idling there with 2 guys that looked to be in their late 20s. I remembered thinking that it looked like something you'd see in a TV show or horror movie. Just a creepy looking van, especially at 3 AM in the morning. We had to pass them to turn around, and they looked at us in a way that really gave us a bad feeling. So we turned around and then had to pass them again to pull out onto the main road. As we passed them, the driver was leaning in his head and had it out to the window partially, like he wanted us to stop and say something. Being it's almost 3 AM, we know it's best to keep driving. My friend wasn't able to get a hold of anyone, so he tried mapping it out again. The GPS was delayed due to poor signal and we missed our turn again. We saw a small clearing to pull over, so we decided to pull over to the side of the road to verify where we're going. About 10 seconds later, the red minivan with fog lights pulled up next to us on my side and rolls down the windows. I roll down my window and they initiate conversation saying if we seen a white pickup Dodge truck. We say we hadn't and they say, alright, thanks. We then asked if they knew where Meadow Rue was, the street we're looking for. They said it's on the first street on the left, if we headed back the way we come. We were suspicious, but when we looked at the GPS, it showed that this is on the road that we're on. We now start heading towards Meadow Rue, which is about half a mile away, and saw them pull out and start heading that way behind us. We made the turn into what we thought was Meadow Rue, and this road is a bumpy dirt road and immediately forks off into 2 directions. One side goes straight up and the other goes up a hill. The other is to the side and left that drops down about 2 feet and flattens out. We turned left and dropped down the small incline. The road was narrow, only big enough for 1 car, and lined with trees on both sides for a good distance. Now the first thing we notice here is a dead end sign. and that's getting us a bit worried. We drove about 20 feet and then we see the minivan with fog lights turn in, dropping behind us. At this point, my blood goes cold and I feel a sinking feeling in my stomach. At this point, I know they're following us. I try to be positive and hoping for a split second that they're just going to turn back and go away from us. But then I saw them speeding up again. Now, this is a bumpy dirt road and there's no reason to be going fast. I started speeding up and to that, they slammed into the back of my car, backed off and ran me again. A few seconds later, we made it to a small clearing like a dirt cul-de-sac. I had enough room to pull forward and then reverse, so that I'm facing the direction I've come in. While I'm doing this, they stopped and blocked the road on the one-lane dirt road. They hop out of the car and one shouts, "This ain't Meadow Road, idiot. Get out of the car." The one guy had positioned himself directly in front of my car, about 10 to 15 feet away between the trees and his van. The other guy started walking up to my passenger side where my friend is, and they kept shouting at us to get out, but I gun it. And the guy just stood there. I'm trying to run him over. He managed to jump out of the way. I thought for sure there wasn't enough room for us between his van and the trees, and figure we're gonna get stuck, but we have no guns and that's not a better choice. I thought we'd have to bail out and run into the woods and hide, but to my surprise, we get through. It was such a tight fit that both my mirrors collapse in. I now speed out of there, getting off the main road going home. Now I saw a state trooper not long before this, and I really want to see them again. I was scared to death of being chased again and then run off the road at higher speeds. So instead of slowing down, I blew past the state trooper, doing 90 in a 45. Since that is extreme speeding, I thought it'd get the trooper's attention, but for whatever reason it didn't. There was only one turn on the whole way back, and when I slowed down to make it, the van's nowhere in sight. I still flew back at 90 miles per hour just to be safe. The next day, we try and tell our friends what happened, and no one believes us. Not one freaking person. They thought we didn't feel like driving all the way back, so we made up a story. The guy who had invited us over originally said, if we're serious, we needed to file a police report with the Alaskan state troopers. So, we went to file a police report at the state trooper's office in town. We filled out a report. After giving our story to the trooper, he told us to wait and he then left the room. About 15 minutes later, he came back in and told us to tell the truth. Confused, we say, "What do you mean?" He said the theory is that we're too drunk, driving around late after Cinco de Mayo, and we plowed into the van. He said he thought the owner heard that happened and then came out to confront us. We repeatedly tell him that this isn't the case, and sadly we don't have evidence, but he doesn't either and lets us go. The next day, we check the area and show him on the map. I guess when he didn't find a wrecked car, he knew we're probably telling the truth. He said to meet him again and verify the area, but we told him we didn't want to go near there. After 2 weeks, he called us again to come in and ID the vehicle. He shows us a picture of a minivan, and I'm sure this is the one we saw, but I can't really know for certain. Now to this day, no one really believes my story. They think we did it just to provoke the incident, or we just made it all up to sound cool. But this did happen, and it's just a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Let's start with a little backstory. I'm a 24-year-old female that fell in love with national parks. So much so that I decided to work full-time at one for about 3 years. This experience allowed me to meet some great people, but also welcome some sketchy individuals. This particular story starts with a man that we'll call Sam. Sam was a tall man with a shaved head and glasses. He was a kind of co-worker that would always linger awkwardly. He made everyone feel uncomfortable, but not enough to warrant concern. The only issue that I really noticed was that he seemed to like drinking a lot. He would show up to work still drunk, and be sent home because of it somewhat regularly. He seemed innocent enough though, in a socially awkward way. Like he was fine, just always panicky. I only worked with him for a few months before I'm transferred to a new location. A few months after starting the new position, I was in the employee break room browsing my newsfeed when I get 5 new messages in 3 minutes. I didn't even realise people could type that fast. The messages are from Sam. Something caught me off guard because I never spoken to him outside of my last position. The messages consisted of vague threats regarding my friends and myself. He seemed upset to find out that I had gay friends and thought that I was trained but tainted from association. I was less upset at his foul perception of me and more annoyed that he targeted my friends, who are truly lovely. I am bad when it comes to taking the high road and decide to give him a piece of my mind. We weren't friends. I mean, hardly acquaintances. So I didn't feel that his behaviour was appropriate, and I quite frankly was angry. Through our exchange, the original rude context of the messages became obviously threatening. He told me I should go and die with my friends, and that he'd be happy to see our misery. I'm shocked. His anger didn't make sense to me, and I realised that I wasn't going to be the reason that this lunatic ended up getting to HR. We worked within the same company, so I think my best route to prevent further harassment's this. HR advised me to block contact from him while they investigate, but also alert the authorities in case he acts out on his threats. Authorities are involved and are not fazed by the messages. They almost seem annoyed that I bothered them. I fill out a statement and was told to contact them if it progresses. The next day, I woke up to find trash all over my front steps. This is odd but not too strange. I actually thought it's a raccoon since I'm in a national park. I then saw a piece of paper though with some words on it next to it. It says "Watch your back." I look around, see the other neighbouring cabins, but nobody's watching. I clean up the mess but save the note. I wanted to show my sister who lived with me. When she got back home later that morning, I called her up on the previous night's events. She didn't even know Sam because, like I said, we're not friends. Why would I mention him in my personal life? I mean, God. I gave her a brief description of him in case she saw him lurking around and headed to work. Halfway throughout my shift, I get a phone call from Alexa. She sounds shaken when she tells me that a man matching Sam's description come to our cabin asking where I was. She plays dumb and pretended to not even know me. He then says, I'll be back later, and walks away. She said he sounded and acted like he'd been heavily drinking and had some intense coldness to him, like he could just kill and not care about it. I'm not messing around at this point, and have watched enough crime shows to know that you shouldn't underestimate someone. So I called the company's security team and asked to have someone check out on my sister and for her to be escorted home immediately. I'm home within 20 minutes of her phone call. She gave me some security information and they're able to find out which cabin he resided in. And great for me, it's only a 2-minute walk down our street, which is really unnerving. Park rangers are called again, and they get more statements from the both of us and decide to pay him a visit. They seem to be taking the situation more seriously now that he knows where I live. They come back after talking to his roommate. It's confirmed that he lives there, but he hasn't been home since the night before. Authorities put a word out to keep an eye out for Sam. They offer to have a unit keep an eye out for us, which we gladly accept and go to sleep. I then wake up to 34 messages from an unknown number. It's Sam again. He got very angry that HR and Rangers were involved. He said, "You're gonna pay for this. You mess with the wrong person, I'm gonna end you." I email HR presenting them screenshots of this, and I demand they resolve this immediately and want to set up a meeting with our directors to discuss termination. See, in national parks, you're hired and the company provides cheap housing on site, and when you're fired you have to leave the national park within 24 hours. So I thought this would be a resolution to the majority of my problems. They seem to agree with me and try to locate Sam for a meeting. No one has seen him since the first messages began 2 days prior, so the park's on a manhunt. The park is huge and it's easy to hide in if you don't want to be found. Thankfully for me, his roommate alerted officials when he stumbled in drunk the next day. They're able to speak with him sober and get him into the HR building a couple of hours later. After the meeting, I'm mortified that he's been given a first and final write-up and will continue to work and live on my street. He's apparently given a sob story about his personal issues and promises to leave me alone. I was baffled that, even with him threatening to kill me, they aren't gonna fire him. Thankfully, the Rangers are equally surprised and still offer surveillance just in case. I was quiet for 3 days. I thought it was actually over, and started feeling bad for him. I thought maybe he was going through stuff, and I was just his mental punching bag. I didn't agree with it, but I no longer felt as threatened, if that makes sense. This is until I get a knock on my door and find 2 Rangers wanting to speak with me. According to the Rangers, a few people from the HR department, Sam's roommate had to call the emergency line when he started acting bizarre after the meeting and tried to convince him to lure me to a secluded place so Sam could take care of me. Thankfully, his roommate wasn't a psycho and reported the situation immediately once Sam went to the bathroom. Rangers were on site within minutes and had him restrained in order to search a cabin. They ended up finding a loaded firearm and suspected suicide note that stated he was going to kill me, then himself. There was also enough evidence found to ban him from all national parks. I have since moved to a different one and changed my contact info. He has since contacted me once to brag about how much I helped him secure unemployment benefits, which I quirkily shared to officials. According to officials, he is restricted to a southern AZ county due to other crimes that he later committed. As for HR, the director had to deal with harassment from Sam after the banning and asked me to testify on his behalf. I haven't heard anything since. I don't understand why he targeted me. We hadn't had very many interactions even at work. I have tried to dig through memories to find a single time that I may have invented or invited this kind of behaviour, but I'm convinced it wasn't me, it was him. I hope I never see him again. A number of years ago, I was up in the northern end of BC, in the islands out by Port Hardy. I set up camp right by the beach close to the shore, did the normal catch of fish and cook it for dinner over my campfire. It's pretty perfect really. A few hours pass and it's getting dark. I climbed into the tent and fall asleep quickly. I get woken up by extremely heavy breathing on the beach from something big in the area of my fire, but the tide was in now, so the waves would have covered it. My first thought is that it's a bear, but on the islands where I was, bears aren't common at all, to the point that there hasn't been one documented ever. This is blasting through my mind. The thought of Bigfoot also runs through my mind. At this point, I'm like, yeah, there's no such thing as Bigfoot, so what the hell is it? I gain my courage and open my tent. I shine my flashlight around for a bit, but I don't see anything, so get out of my tent. I am shining my light around when I hear it again. This huge breath followed by a small splash. I focus my light on the beach when I see a massive orca rolling around, and it's near my fire. This behemoth of a marine mammal scared the life out of me, but it turned into being an amazing thing. It's a massive animal just playing in front of me. I noticed them just off the shore bobbing, probably half asleep. I still didn't sleep for the rest of the night. This happened when I was maybe 9 or 10 years old. I have a sister who is 8 years younger than me, so she's about 1 or 2 at the time. During the summer months in Calgary, Canada, my family and another 3 or 4 families would frequently have barbecues out in Browness Park. For those of you unfamiliar with Browness Park, it's a very large public park in Calgary that has a lot of picnic areas, playgrounds and fountains for the kids to play at. The area is so large that you'd have to walk 5 or 10 minutes between playgrounds and picnic areas and bathrooms. So often us kids would have to leave the adults to go and play in the fountains on the playground, and it was generally safe enough that we never had any issues. I recall one time we went and we were playing in our bathing suits when I see this tall guy with glasses and a large cowboy hat sitting on a bench outside of the fountain area just watching us. I was a naive kid who never had any prior talks about stranger danger or any of that stuff, and his cowboy hat made me automatically assume I'm dealing with a park ranger. After a couple of hours, we leave the fountains to eat with the adults. My babysitter announced she needs to use a bathroom. She was nearly potty trained at this point, but not completely. My mum says, "Can you go to the bathroom," which is like 10 minutes away. I just remember walking with them when a guy comes up and says hello, starting a conversation. Wearing a cowboy hat, I again assume that he's another park ranger. He was asking for our names and ages, and overall had a very friendly demeanour. So our idiotic selves talk openly to him. I don't notice that he had a particular interest in my baby sister, and even at one point asked to hold her, but she's too fussy and wants to walk. This went on until we reached the bathrooms. We part ways and we go inside the bathroom. Now, this is when even my naive self started feeling like something's wrong. My sister ended up having an accident on herself, asking my friend to stay with her in the bathroom while I ran to get more clothes from my mum. When I stepped out of the bathroom, I found that same strange guy standing a couple of feet away from the bathroom, clearly waiting for something. That's when my alarm bells started going off. I ran back to the kitchen area and told my mum that I think some guy's following us, and she came with me to the bathroom. When the guy saw me with my mother approaching about 100 meters away, he booked it, power walking in the opposite direction as fast as possible without attracting any attention from anyone. At the time, I completely forgot about what happened. It wasn't until a couple of years later that I suddenly realised that the strange man was waiting for us. And it's the same guy who approached us before pretending to be a park ranger. So I can only assume he's been waiting for hours and waited for us to leave the adults before approaching. Now this particular area doesn't even have park rangers. I have no idea what his true intentions were, but I'm so grateful I never had to find out. In December of 2002, one of my best friends, R, was getting married, and I had moved off the peninsula a couple of years ago and had never met her, but apparently they had been together for a while. Against my advice, he joined the Marines and was marrying his girl before getting shipped off to Iraq for his first tour. My other two friends, K and W, came back to our old hometown of Port Angels for the wedding as well. We had a good time the night before the wedding and woke up early to make the 50-hour drive to Forks for the ceremony at the courthouse. Things started out bad as a tyre on my car blew out early on the way there. We're forced to make the rest of the trip on my friend's spare tyre under 20 miles per hour. And we're almost late, but made it, and they had a nice little ceremony before we went to the bride's grandmother's house for the reception. The festivities didn't end until well after dark. The drive back to Port Angels was risky to make with a spare tyre. It was overcast, foggy and pitch black. There are no street lamps on the highway between Forks and PA. My car was small and black, and we had almost been hit by speeding cars in the daytime. I wasn't going to be able to get back to PA until I had a new tyre, but there was nowhere left in Forks open to buy one at the time. We're going to have to find somewhere to bed down until the morning. The bride asked if we could crash at her grandma's, but the grandma said she's too afraid that we're going to do stuff to her, out of her mind clearly. It was way too cold to sleep in my car. I had spent too much money on the party the night before, being the best man and all, and we couldn't get money together for a room. The bride suggested her grandmother's cabin. Her other grandmother had passed away a few months ago, and the cabin she lived in is out towards LA Push was vacant. My friend Kay inexplicably said, "No way. I'm going to take the last bus back to PA, see ya," and walked out the door without another word. That should have been a huge sign that something was wrong, but I'm not going to be sleeping in my car. I grabbed my things out my car, and Dar and his wife drove us out to her grandmother's cabin about 15 minutes out of town. It was called a cabin because it's in the middle of nowhere, but it was really just a small 2-story house. There was a lamp in the driveway, but other than that, everything's pitch black out. Now R and his bride let W and I inside have a look around. Most of the furniture has already been removed. There was a card table and a couple of metal chairs in the kitchen and a wardrobe still in my bedroom. The wardrobe's completely empty, however. Its contents are in a pile in the middle of the room and formed a man-sized nest. My uncle uses this place as a hunting lodge sometimes. Now he's a bit crazy and hasn't got over my grandmother's death. She volunteers. If he finds you here, he'll be mad, so hide. Honestly, but we have lots of Pepsi and beer in the fridge, so help yourselves. W and I felt exactly as you'd imagined, but at this point, it was either stay here in the cabin or try and camp outside where it's below freezing. R and his wife went to have their wedding night while W and I figured out exactly where we was gonna hide if said uncle come finding us. There was a set of retractable stairs, and this went up to the attic where we found a couple of dusty, stained single mattresses covered with handmade quilts and husks of thousands and thousands of dead insects. We decided it's best to retract the chair and hide out in the attic for the night. Apparently, the crazy uncle preferred to sleep in a pile of his dead mother's clothes. The kitchen's devoid of knives, but I found a wood splitting maul on the back porch. We kept it upstairs just in case. In my backpack, I still have a couple of malt liquors left over from the night before. Without a TV or radio, we have no other form of entertainment, so we sat there drinking. Without any clocks available, we lose track of time and had a decent buzz going. What we had heard though sobered us up quickly. We heard a noise that sounded like the doorknob downstairs being shaken violently. With wide eyes, we look at each other and listen carefully. The noise occurred a couple more times. I slowly move to a window and try and quickly peek out to see if there's a car in the driveway. Nothing. We began to talk again, but once again, are violently interrupted by what sounded like the refrigerator door slamming shut and chairs moving, but no voices. I grabbed them all and went to the top of the stairs, just terrified. As suddenly as the noise started, it stopped, and we began to wait in silence and heard nothing. We're freaking the hell out. We couldn't go to sleep, but we got bored and began talking again in whisper. Without a clock or watch, I don't know how long after we heard the chairs move, it was when the phone began to ring. We waited for the phone to stop, or somebody downstairs to answer it, but it kept ringing. It kept ringing beyond any normal duration. I figured the crazy uncle, if he is there, was gonna pick it up long ago, so we're probably alone. The only people we knew who were there was R and his wife. With the number of rings, I assumed it's an emergency, and I lowered the stairs and took them all with me just in case. I braced for an attack, but no one came. Nobody was waiting for me at the bottom. I could see the kitchen was clear. I walk over to the still ringing phone and pick it up. The ringing stopped, but there's not even a dialer tone. The phone's dead. I pick up the phone and looked at it. It wasn't plugged in at the wall. It was an old rotary phone with mechanical bells that looked like it had been made in the 60s, and it sits there in silence. I used the bathroom and went back upstairs and told W about the phone. He says I'm messing around. I say go and check. W's scared. He needed to take a leak but's too scared to go downstairs, and peed out of the second floor window instead. The window stuck open and was freezing. I was freaking mad and worried. The phone starts ringing again. We sat and counted the rings. It got up to 170. I wasn't going back downstairs to answer the unplugged phone. I lay on the mattress, listening to it until I passed out. In the morning, W and I woke up freezing. We had no idea when I would be coming up to us, but decided we would search around for a phone. The night before, I heard the unplugged phone. We can't find it now. There's only one phone in the property. It's still unplugged in the kitchen. I look over it. There's no batteries or anything, not even a dial tone. Nothing. There are some strange experiences from a camping trip in northern Ontario I went on back when I was a little kid with my dad and stepmom. I want to preface this by saying that, despite the things I'm writing about, it was still a good experience. My parents split amicably when I was very young, and I didn't actually live with my dad. I still get to see him though, and these kinds of trips are like a bonding experience and pretty fun, to be honest. I just don't want this to overshadow that. Okay, time for my story. My dad and stepmom rented a tiny cabin in northern Ontario one summer for a family friend. I don't know exactly where it was, but I'm certain it's in the north of Midland. The cabin was on a lake, and the owner ferried us there on a tiny motorboat. This wasn't an island, mind you. I think there were only a few roads to access it. Some strange things happened on this trip, and while there isn't a single cohesive timeline here, I am not an experienced writer. So the first experience, the owner had left a canoe at the cabin, and we took it out on a lot of trips to the lake. Usually later in that day. I was obsessed with frogs and fish and wildlife as a kid, and this lake was loaded with marshes, so I loved these outings. I remember one in particular. It was almost sunset, and we're heading back through one of the marshes, and I hear a faint humming sound, similar to that of a transformer from the tree line. My dad/stepmom noticed it too as it grew louder. It stopped all of a sudden a few moments later, but so does everything else. The sounds of birds, frogs, etc., and any wildlife has completely stopped, and everything went silent. Then suddenly, all of the sounds started again. I have no explanation for it, and it is creepy as hell. My second experience was the cabins on the shoreline, but there wasn't a beach or anything close to one. It was actually very steep and a rocky shore around the entire area, but once you got in the water, there was sand, mussels, crayfish around there. My dad got the idea to catch some for cooking. My dad isn't a woodsman by any means, but he's a very resourceful guy. So we canoed to a sandy area close to the shore and waded out to catch mussels on both sides of the water here. The shore's very steep, and it's like 2 floors up with thick forests at the top. At some point during our escape, I caught a glimpse of something along the tree line on the shore. I can't make it out very well, but it's white, almost like the texture of a birch, and lanky. I remember thinking it's definitely not a person, but it wasn't too far from the general shape of one. It staggered around, lethargically and slow. If it was an animal, something was wrong with it. I waded over to my dad and told him to look up, but now it's gone. I never saw anything like it again since. My third experience is one that I don't actually remember. Instead, my dad told me about it. On one of our canoe outings, my dad and stepmom decided to visit this little peninsula on the other side of the lake close to the marshes area. We got there and dragged the canoe onto that little shoreline there and walked single file. There wasn't a path, but the trees weren't particularly dense either. Enough so where you can see the water when you look back. Pretty soon after, he noticed that the entire place is covered in mushrooms, and live trees had given way to downed and dead trees further inland. This is unusual, because it didn't look like there had been a fire or anything. They're just dead. It also started smelling really bad. Not wanting to endanger us by going further, we all turned back. He didn't want to let on that he was very nervous, but he told me it seriously freaked him out, and he never saw anything like it again, or could ever locate that again after. On to the fourth. This is something my dad told me that happened to him during a trip a couple of years ago. He went hiking by himself at some point, and when he was deeper into the woods, everything around just stopped. No sound whatsoever. No movement. No wind or even leaves falling. And it all returns a minute later. And nothing else eventful happened for the rest of his hike. But it's one thing he's never been able to explain. The fifth is we spent most nights having fires outside. And on one night, my dad and I stayed up watching X-Files on this tiny black and white TV. I'm actually not sure of how this place even had power since it wasn't accessible by road. Maybe it had a generator, or even a small PV or battery setup for all I know. There wasn't much other than a couple of lights, that TV, and a small water pump at the lake. Anyway, I was young and X-Files was spooking me out. During one episode, we both heard that humming coming from outside. Like when we were on the canoe, it was faint but there. We go outside with flashlights to see if we can identify it, but we see nothing. We didn't want to go into the woods this late either or to canoe out, but it wasn't far away. We just went back inside. It wasn't intermittent throughout the rest of the night, sometimes getting louder and quieter. In the morning, our water wasn't working. My dad went out to investigate, and apparently, the cable into the pumps had been messed with. We don't know who done it. For my sixth experience, this is probably the most unsettling one that I remember. I'd woken up earlier than everyone else, because I was hyped to go out and catch toads and frogs and whatever else I could find. I even set a trap for the chipmunks there. I remember one morning, I had woken up just before sunrise and was still in bed. In the window adjacent to my bed, I saw something that usually wasn't there. It was half a face poking around the edge of the window, staring into the cabin. Sickly pale orange with giant black holes where the eyes are supposed to be. Obviously not human. I'm terrified and hid, and eventually fell back to sleep. And when I wake up again, everyone's awake, and there's no signs of anything there. I always thought of this particular experience as something I imagined after waking up. It had to be. About a month ago, I met up with my dad while visiting my home city, and we got talking about this trip again. He mentioned that there were quite a few times when he felt uneasy. For example, my dad usually goes jogging early in the morning for exercise. He decides to abstain a couple of mornings as the cabin's nice and warm, but he can't shake the feeling that something's creepy. I only connected this with the window incident after our conversation, but when I did it really made me think about the entire trip as the reason I decided to write a post about it. I can't undeniably prove what happened, but for what it's worth, you can see the history adds up weirdly. These are all the experiences I can think of for now. I'm sure there's more that my mum or dad had that they haven't told me yet. I'll share them if I get more. So my story begins in the sticks of Missouri at an old campsite. For a few years, everyone on my mum's side of the family would meet and stay at the campsite owned by a family friend. It lies in Mississippi and is miles away from any town. It's on about 20 acres of overall mostly cleared land, but with woods lining the perimeter, and has a pool, cafeteria/mess hall, gymnasium, and about 10 cabins. It sits next to an old plantation house that was turned into a shop on the Underground Railroad. It has a secret room behind the fireplace that held people. Anyway, my mum, her siblings, and my grandmother all went to the camp when they were about 10 to 13 years old. So this place is about 90 years old. There are signatures all over the cabin interiors from the past campers dating from the early 20th century until present. The aunts and female cousins stayed in one cabin while the men all stayed in another, and my brother and one cousin decided to be bold and stay in one up the hills by themselves. Needless to say, they didn't get much sleep that night and were pretty creeped out the next day, but that's not their story. On one side of the room, we had pushed the beds together to make a giant combo bed. I was on the bottom of a bunk bed at the edge of the combo bed furthest from the screened wooden door. My cousin A was on the top bunk, and two other cousins were to my right in the next beds. So after the last day, we're all winding down from activities and fun, telling stories until eventually we fall asleep. A few hours later, I wake up for no apparent reason, but when I looked towards the screen, I saw a blonde/whitish hair bounce outside. I didn't think much of it because my cousins are blonde and have a blonde cousin. I figured they were just messing around and went back to sleep. A bit later, I woke up again and I saw a complete apparition of a woman standing in the centre of the cabin, rapidly surveying the rooms. She's almost completely opaque white, I'd say about 90%, and dressed in 19th century working class garbs. She was looking around the room, and to me, she seemed confused as to what we're all doing in there, but I don't feel any negative presence. At this point, I was still in a stupor from having been awoken in the middle of the night, so grabbed my flashlight, shining it on her, and said, "What?" in a whispered yell. Had I been completely conscious, this wouldn't have happened, but it's a reflex. As soon as the light hits her, she vanishes. When she vanished, I felt unable to comprehend what had happened, and I just rolled back to sleep. Now, the next morning, I had somewhat of a realization / remembrance of what happened, but I didn't want to tell anyone what happened at fear of having it dismissed or no one believing me. We were all getting ready for the day and walking to the mess hall for lunch, when my cousin asked me if I'd seen anything weird. Shocked and relieved, I tell her the story. Apparently, she had woken up before and saw the woman in her room. Not knowing how to react, she slowly turned over and tried to fall asleep again. Moments later, she heard me click my flashlight and exclaimed. She said she also didn't feel that she was a negative presence, but was shocked by what she saw. We eventually went back over the story together, and it turns out we both experienced unexplainable things throughout our lives. We had just never talked to anyone about it, because we've assumed no one would understand or want to. She suggested we possess some sort of negativity or sensitive thing that makes us aware of presences and energies around us. I agree with it, and we don't often share these stories with anyone. We did tell the story to the rest of the family, but they never believed us. I just moved into the 3rd floor of an apartment building, which is at the bottom of a very steep hill. From my bedroom window, I could see an old wooden staircase through the trees. It wasn't easy to access, and there was nothing behind the apartment except for the hill, which began only a few feet away from the back of the building. It looked like the kind of steps you'd see on a nature trail, except they started several feet up on the bank of the hill, with no easy way to get there because of the climbing. So I did. I slipped and fell at least once and had to grab onto a little tree trunk to stop me falling. I probably should have done it on a nice sunny day, but curiosity got the better of me, and this town wasn't known for having lovely weather. I got to the staircase, walk up it with ease, and once I reached the top, I look around for any evidence of its original purpose. I expected to find a hidden picnic area, or an overgrown nature trail. Something that would make sense, but there's nothing. And also, nowhere for anything to be. The hill just kept going without levelling off, so I kicked the leaves around for a bit, thinking that maybe there were more stairs. I found nothing and gave up. After coming home, I did a brief search of nature trails in the area and tried to look at old aerial views to see if I could see anything. None of this yielded any theories that I can recall, but I do remember not being able to find the staircase on maps either. I thought this could be explained by leaves in the way, but there weren't any. When I went to the drop-off, I had to give my rent to the manager, and I asked her if there was any stairs in the woods behind the apartment. Her response was, "What stairs?" I asked if there'd been anything there, but she said no. There was a house a lot further up the hill, but no stairs. A few months later, I drove my roommate to the ATM and noticed a set of steps on the hill by the bank. There must have been a building there at some point, but it's now gone. I asked my roommate if he knew anything about the mystery stairs behind our apartment, and wasn't surprised to find out that he hadn't noticed any. He never paid much attention to anything that wasn't a video game. When we went home, I tried to explain where it was and show him from my bedroom window, but I can't see them. We couldn't see him from his window either, so I decided to go back out looking again. I walk around the back corner, looked up the hill and was confused when I don't see the stairs. since they've been in the woods. I figure they must have got covered up by leaves or debris, but that doesn't explain it. Let me know if you find them, my roommate says as he goes back inside, and I never found it. And to this day I have no logical explanation to where it possibly could have gone. Perhaps it was a temporary installation by an art student, but if there was an art student, you would have heard about it. Plus it looked like it had been there for years and there was no evidence left behind. I think I would have noticed if someone removed it too, and God, it would have been noisy. Seems like it would have taken a lot of time too. And then I would have found evidence also. I've heard about people finding strange things like stairs in the woods before, and I never thought I would see it either. But I really have no explanation for it. Creeps the hell out of me thinking about it. So my house is on the biggest chunk of property in this area. It's on about 110 acres and was originally kind of a park. Unfortunately, people from all over didn't get that memo that we moved in, and therefore continue to party, hunt and fish whenever they want. Over the years, these problems began to go away, minus a few. Before we talk about the perpetrators, or at least their leaders, we should discuss what was behind the property. It's an asylum near the woods, mostly housing psychopaths, schizophrenics, and those who have suffered mental breakdowns. Now it isn't rare to hear some random screaming for no reason over there. So back to my story. There were 4 men who kept coming back and hunting in the middle of night. We let some people hunt in the night on Saturdays, but for the most part, hunting's off limits. We're never able to catch these 4 men, always wearing masks. I mention that because the leader always wore a creative mask, a scary one, most of the time wearing a pig one. These men were sneaky, smart, that's what made them scary. Now I had 3 encounters with them, the first being in June of last year. A few friends and I decided to go on an adventure throughout the woods, and we discovered something frightening. We found a fortress, covered in beer cans, with a chair on top. Being the teenagers we are, we decided the smart thing to do is to destroy all the hunters' hard work by kicking the whole thing down. Oh God, have we messed up. We later returned to the fortress, and it's rebuilt, almost like a shrine to the last one. And spray painted on the ground was "Try again, we dare you." Encounter 2 happened during a simple walk at night. Sometimes when I get upset, I walk through the woods. This time was at night, and it just so happened that the hunters were also out. So I was walking along, minding my own business, when I see the man in the pig mask. He sees me. He now knows my face. I hear a deep laugh and he turns his gun towards me. I have no idea what he's gonna do, but I book it out of there. Encounter 3, in my opinion, the most blood-curdling. It was only about a week ago. I was walking home from my cousin's house in the dark. I had my flashlight shining, and I felt safe. But something's off. The barn lights are on, and they're never on. No one ever goes in there. The floors are falling through. I simply brush it off as a technical error. But then, in the middle of the field, I see someone in the same pig mask, and he saw me. His words have haunted my dreams since then, yelling, "Get out of here, before I make you." The way he said it terrifies me, so vicious, like he wants to kill me, and I haven't been there since. It was later discovered that in that barn, they'd been setting up shop for some time. I'm so glad that nothing ever come of it and they never actually truly come for me. This happened to my mum, sister and me many years ago. I was about 8 then, I'm 37 now. and my sister is 5 years younger. Back then we lived in a city in the UK, in a not so nice part of town. Don't get me wrong, this wasn't the ghetto or Wild West, but there were nicer places to live. A bit of background information to the story. My dad was self-employed, owned a small factory on the outskirts of the city centre about 5 miles from home. The factory is surrounded by wasteland homes to mostly derelict and broken buildings. The area was grey, dirty, and covered in graffiti. Hell, not even the city homeless would take refuge here. One day, my dad calls my mum at home. He needed her to come home to the factory to help finish a job, but they only had one car, so it meant us getting the bus. I don't mind. My 8-year-old self was full of adventure and loves the idea of riding the bus to big town. The bus ride's uneventful as we brave the city traffic, eventually going through a forested area, then arriving at our stop. The described earlier, it's not the type of place people go unless they have a specific reason, so it wasn't surprising we're the only ones getting off here. We started in the direction of my dad's factory, which was just under a mile from the bus stop. My sister's asleep in the pushchair as I was jabbering away, when suddenly I become aware my mum's preoccupied. I look at her, but she said, "Keep walking." I noticed she glanced over her shoulder near the tree line. I slowed down, but she tugged my arm and says keep going. I remembered feeling anxious as my mum walks faster, pushchair bumping over uneven slabs. Then I heard him. First the footsteps, clumsy and heavy, then his raspy voice. He was muttering incoherently, having a conversation with, I guess, himself. Suddenly my mum crosses the road, holding my arm tightly while steering the pushchair. He crosses the road too. My mum's cursing under her breath. We cross again. Whenever you think you're being followed, there's always a nagging doubt you're paranoid. But when we cross the same road for the 4th time in 5 minutes and this guy's still following us, I knew it was on. This was back in the 80s, no mobile phones, no internet and no SOS texts. You're really off grid. But now I can feel adrenaline. We're approaching a T-junction. My dad's factory is only around the corner, but it's about 500 yards away. If you didn't know where you were, you'd assume you're heading further into the ghost town. As we turn the corner, my mum told me to run as fast as I can to get my dad. I hear my mum and the pushchair thundering behind me. My heart is pounding. I ran like my life depended on it. My feet are crunching on broken glass. I don't dare slow down. I could see the small road ahead leading to a car park at the factory. I knew what I had to do. I shout for my dad as loud as I can. My throat is burning as I gulp for air. Hot tears stain my red cheeks. I burst in the door crying and my dad comes out running. He grabs the nearest object and ran towards the car park. I stood looking out there, watching my dad sprint across the car park. I see the pushchair too. My mum told my dad where we'd been followed and points in the direction, and my dad took off. He come back 10 minutes later. The creepy guy's nowhere to be seen. My dad said he probably ran off when he heard me shouting. With all the old empty buildings and wasteland, it's easy to disappear, even into the woods. My dad wanted to take the car and drive around to try and find him, but my mum doesn't want to be alone, even in the sanctuary at the factory, so he agreed to finish up the job, and we all drove home. My parents never reported it to the police. Living in a major city, you get all kinds of unsavoury characters, but the police wouldn't have done anything because he never harmed us. He never got the chance. We think he's probably very high or very unwell mentally. Either way, it scared the life out of us. My father sadly died and I needed to clear my head, so went on a solo trip to a cabin in Oregon with my dog. Now I had a couple of weird things happen. My Pop-Tart incident still trips me out, but I think I can write that one off as maybe someone messing with me. But here's my story. I'll be the first to say that all of this could have happened in my head, like with anything. The mind's a freaky place and can play tricks on you. Now, whenever I was scared as a kid, my dad always told me that in life, you shouldn't be scared of ghosts. Fear the living, they'll hurt you. In my late teenage years, I come into some money after my father committed suicide and I received an inheritance from him. Near the time of my dad's passing, he and my mum owned a cabin in Oregon. The cabin had been put up for sale by my mum, who could no longer afford the payments or renting it out. The cabin was set to go on the market for sale in less than a month and was in the process of finalising a paperwork with the realtor and lawyer. So for that month's time, the cabin was not going to be rented out any longer and was going to be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get away for a while and clear my head in light of all things that were going on. I quit work, packed up snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog and headed up in my dad's car that he had wheeled to me to the cabin. Now, this was our family cabin that my parents rented out throughout the year when they're not using it. I had keys to the cabin and also had the code to the alarms, so I didn't feel the need to stop at the rental management company and advise them of my stay. That has nothing to do with my story, but I felt the need to mention it anyway. The first few days of the cabin are normal, and nothing seems unusual. I spent my days playing with my dog in the snow, snowboarding, and in the evenings I played PlayStation or listened to music, drinking and smoking on the balcony. I already stocked up on food, cigarettes and liquor, so I was pretty much shut inside apart from the occasional venture out to the shops or the slopes. With my dog as company and my DVDs and PlayStation as entertainment, I was content and started to feel relaxed after all the drama that preceded my outing. The cabin itself was 2 stories. Bottom store had the living room and a side guest bedroom, along with the small kitchen. Upstairs had another 2 rooms, along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time was spent either in the living room, kitchen or master bedroom. I never ventured into the other rooms and always kept the doors leading into them shut. Open doors to darkness scares me. Anyhow, the 3rd day came around. I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog, playing games, etc. It was pretty heavy snowfall out, and I didn't feel like trekking down the hill to the main road in my car and decided to stay in. That's when things started getting a bit weird. In our area, there's only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours, maybe a block away from one another. All other cabins aside from these 2 are a mile away from ours, surrounding us with mostly forestry and very tall pine trees. Both these cabins are empty from the past couple of days from what I knew, and no one's currently there. Now, that's some background and I'll jump to the weirdness. Around midday, while outside with my dog, I noticed what appears to be footprints in the snow around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, so the footprints looked semi-fresh, like someone's been there in the last half hour before me. I thought that maybe someone was staying in the cabin near me that I haven't noticed. Maybe they were shut-ins like me. Well, alright, whatever. The prints lead away from the cabin, but disappear in the snow towards the tree line. Disregarding the footprints, I went back inside. Nighttime came around and I decided to head to bed. My dog Midnight was laying on the bed with me when I noticed his ears perk up. This was followed by him quickly jumping off the bed, running downstairs to the living room. I lay in bed and stay silent. I can hear him moving around downstairs, back and forth. After around 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs to me, starts doing his doggy dance, as a sign that he needs to pee or wants to go outside for something. Oh, well fine. I can't say no to him, so we both went downstairs to the outside driveway for him. He didn't want to pee though. As soon as he gets outside, he started to pull on his leash, trying to drag me to where he wanted to go. He kept looking into the dense part of the trees where the prints had been earlier, but he also kept sniffing the side of the house and looking up towards the roof. That's really odd. After he figured out that I'm not going anywhere near it, he sat down and just stares into the darkness. This is a bit unusual for him, but alright. Maybe there are forest animals out there that he wants to chase down, but screw this. Do not want to chance anything, so I pull him back inside and we both head back upstairs. Around half an hour later, I was lying in bed when I hear what sounded like hoofs walking on my roof. It was only a series of around 6 steps, and I rationalised that it could have been a pine cone falling from a tree onto the roof, or maybe a kind-hearted forest animal running around. But here's the thing, the footsteps aren't spaced apart like a man's stride would be, so that was freaking me out. Midnight, I also heard the noise and was quick to run to the balcony screen door, expecting to see something, but there's nothing. Alright, you know what? I'm a tough guy and at the time considered myself fairly well built and strong enough to handle myself. I grabbed my coat and shoes along with my cigarettes and flashlight and went out on the balcony. Screw it, right? As soon as I was outside, I lit up my cigarette and started wondering what this could be, getting onto the roof with my light. Nothing there, and snow on the top was undisturbed. Crazy. Maybe this is all in my head. What about the midnight before? I'm paranoid now. But I think it's in my mind and calmed down. My eyes started to adjust to the darkness, and I kept smoking and just staring at the stars and trees next to our cabin. That's when I saw it. In a tree that was little taller than our cabin, around 20 feet from the balcony, I saw what looked like a man crouched in a squatting position in between 2 branches. It was squatted on one branch with its arms extended above its head, holding onto the branch. Wow. What is that? I wasn't sure if I was really seeing that thing, and just stared motionless. I noticed Midlight stand up and start pacing behind me and lightly barking at the same time. The thing still did not move. I pulled my cigarette out and was debating on shining the light in that direction, but something in my head told me, don't. So I walked back towards the inside, pulling Midnight with me. Once inside, I locked the door and shined the light in the thing's direction, but nothing's there. I shut the curtains to the screen door and retreated back to bed. But later on in the night, I heard light tapping on the screen door like someone's tapping on the glass with their fingers. It was consistent and didn't stop for nearly an hour. Midnight stared at the door, but even he won't go near it. The craziest part for me is that I had the feeling that someone's inviting me to the door, but at the same time, I kept hearing my dad's voice in my head telling me to stay in bed and to not do it. I listened to my dad's voice and stay where I am. Eventually, I pass out and wake up and everything's normal. The rest of the week I spent there was uneventful, and nothing else out of the ordinary happened. I totally admit that it could have all been in my head, but the fact that my dog was acting up too makes me really worried about the whole situation. A bit of preface here. I was around 10 or 11 when this happened. Old enough to stay home alone, but not old enough to recognise some red flags. I attended camp over the summer, the typical 8 to 3 route. Now my house sits at the end of my street, which forms the U, but for some reason, the bus driver would never drop me off at my house. I would always get dropped off at the end of my street, where I would toddle myself all the way back. Both my parents work late hours, sometimes not getting back until 8 PM, and it would be very expensive to hire a babysitter for 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. So, starting 6th grade, when the bus dropped me off at home, I'd be by myself. I'd do the usual middle school routine, play games online and watch TV. Occasionally, my neighbour's cat would come into my backyard and I'd feed her or play with her. The only computer in the house was my dad's workroom one, which has a window overlooking a deck, and the window overlooking the side of the house. We have large bay windows in the living room, dining room, and kitchen of my home, and since we sit on a hill, you can pretty much see the entire backyard from a nice vantage point. So most days when I got home, I toss off my backpack and go right to that room, and you could see me walk from my front door and pop up by the computer from outside. Unfortunately, this would lead to something that I had forgotten about until now. When I got off the bus, I did as expected, go into my dad's workroom, play computer games. About 30 minutes into this, I hear a faint meowing coming from outside the window. I pause and look outside, thinking my neighbour's cat has wandered over, but when I get there I see nothing. I just sat back down and resumed playing, only to hear the meowing again. It was quiet but noticeable, and so I checked out the other window. Nothing. This routine happened for a good 10 minutes and eventually I get frustrated and go into the living room to watch TV. Not even 2 minutes later, meowing from the window I was sitting at happens again. Now I'm confused and a little creeped out, so I shut the blinds and keep trying to watch TV. The meows still go on, but only when they come from right behind me did I jump up and get scared and ready to leave. I went into my bedroom where the blinds were still down but cracked for sunlight. I tried to read a book, only to hear a meow come from outside my bedroom window now. This is enough to make me call my dad, concerned that maybe the cat was hurt, but I couldn't see it to be sure. He said he would have the neighbour come and check it out. 10 minutes go by. I get a call from my dad saying he's coming home from work. Nothing urgent about it, just that his job got cancelled and he's home early. I don't think anything of it. When he got home, I did realise the cat noises have stopped. Fast forward to the present and I asked my dad about the incident, thinking it's funny about how a cat scared me. But what he said next made my blood run cold. After I called him, my neighbour indeed did come and check out my house. What he found were large footprints circling the house, right next to the windows. Someone had been stalking me through my house, seeing where I was, making cat noises trying to lure me outside. They must have known I was home alone, since it was easy to see me. And they must have known that I played with the cat. My neighbour immediately called my dad and searched the property, but found no one. The police weren't called since there was nothing but footprints that led into the woods. I never saw anyone. My dad stayed home with me for the rest of the week. It sickens me to think that people would use those tactics to try and lure someone like my younger self out of their homes to do God knows what in the woods with them. I was driving to work. It's about a 5-hour drive. It was already dark, and about 3 hours of driving in, I start getting really tired. I bought myself a coffee and some snacks at a gas station and continue on, but snacks and coffee can only keep you awake for a certain amount of time, and I feel really dozy. This part of the road is nothing but thick pine wood around me. There's no other cars on the road or anything. Only insects smashing into my windshield now and then on the empty road. Now I'm extremely tired, and at one point I nearly drove off the road. for almost falling asleep. I have to sleep now. I can't wait for a gas station. I must stop or I'm gonna crash. Now, I have such an urgent feeling to find a place where I can stop. It felt like an hour, but it was probably about 5 minutes to go by, and I spot this little pocket in the road. It's like a parking space for quick stops, like peeing, switching drivers and stuff, not a resting area. I stop there, turn down my windows to check if I hear any weird noises, and there's total silence. I turn up my windows again. Nothing bad's gonna happen. I haven't seen a car for like 30 minutes and the road's empty. If someone's checking out my car, I bet it's the cops checking on me to see if I'm okay. I leave my keys in the ignition and lock the doors, just to be safe. I adjust my seat a bit and make it comfortable to sleep in, and I take off my shoes and put them on the passenger seat to the right. It was so nice, and I close my eyes and instantly fall asleep. Now I don't know why, but something wakes me up. I can't explain it. I can't really see anything. Some kind of bright light hits me in the eyes though. First I think it's a flashlight, but now I realise that it's the high beams of a car in my rear view blinding me. I look to my left and I see a dude walking up beside my car. Maybe he wants help with something. Should I make it clear to him that I'm here? He's right beside my left back door. Should I step out and ask what he's doing? I didn't have to. The dude proceeds to jerk and pull on my left door. I almost have a heart attack. He's trying to force his way in. My seat is adjusted to lay down, and I push it back as far as I can. I can reach the pedals, which makes it almost impossible for me to drive my car. I slam the horn and it breaks the silence with a roar and the dude jumps back. That gives me like 2 seconds to push my seat and reach the pedals, but it's still out of adjusting and I'm pulling myself really hard towards the steering wheel. Because my seat is lying flat, it's not supporting my back and it kind of hurts. Anyway, I start my car and drive, kinda, with a cloud of smoke. It's hard driving a car with nothing holding you up properly, but I manage. As soon as I look in my rear view, he stands up looking at me. And what's worse, I can see 2 more guys next to him. I can see the silhouette of their high beams. One of them has something in his hand like a crowbar. I drive super fast, way over the speed limit. I'm terrified. Then, I stop at a gas station to sort my seat out and put my shoes on. I figure out I was only asleep for like 10 minutes, which makes me worried that they were following me. I'm really worried now. I told my boss the next day and he actually said he's heard of problems like this all over Sweden before, where criminals will stop you and rob you or do worse things. I've never had anything like it in my life and it makes me terrified to stop when I'm driving again. This happened a long time ago. I was 12 and at my grandparents' village. We had a cow and an ox, and usually the son of the bull, usually just one, took all the cattle to graze at night and he would take them back. Cows know where to go when going home. My grandpa had a male ox, and since my father was an adult and he wasn't there, I took the responsibility. Basically, my job was to go around the village with the ox tailing after me, calling the people to open their doors. Our ox would grunt, and to call the herd, and all the females would then come out. From then on, I had to take them to a clearing up area in the mountain, and then take them by the river. It was easy. The animals knew where they were going. They were calm, and our bull was a gentle giant. All I did was have to ride him with thin rope on his horns. If any of the females wandered off, all I did was call in or occasionally poke her with a stick in the right direction. My grandpa said that if I see a wild, very rare boar or fox, I should just stay on the ox. Not many animals dare to go near an ox herd. There is a dark part of the forest where it's very quiet, and even the bravest hunters won't go. It is slippery and dangerous. They said that even the deer and boar don't go there. I was forbidden to go there and honestly never wanted to. So during this event, it's during the morning and everything seems fine. I was on the ox going up the mountain. I was glad he let me because it was a hard trek up. I saw that one of the females was wandering off. I followed her and left our ox and the dogs to guide the herd. She went into the forest and I ran to her. I tried steering her away, but she continues. She went in the dark part and stopped. I didn't want to go off just in case she ran back and left me there. And then I heard a crunch and turn around, and a very old man is walking towards us. He looks frail with dirty clothes and has a long beard. I was scared. I'd never seen anything like this my entire time out there before. Now, I laid on the ox clinging to her, not wanting to fall if she ran. Oxes aren't like bulls. They don't jump or kick when scared. They either attack with their horns or run. I was ready to hold on no matter what she chose. Our oxen don't take kindly to strangers, and before I took them out in the mornings, they're always paranoid. Now that's a good thing though, because they trusted their owners. But knowing her, I knew she would either bolt or attack. But weirdly, she just stood there. The stranger then came to us and petted her on the head, whispering something I didn't understand. He looks at me, and his eyes are completely white. Then he turns around and disappears into the trees. Suddenly, the female grunted as though she had woken up now. It was crazy. I'd never seen her act like it before. She suddenly bolts away with "Come," and we found the herd. I quickly got on our rocks and yelled water. He knew that command and went down towards the river. I then ran into one of the houses and tried to explain everything. The couple there stayed with me and sent their daughter to call my grandpa. I literally couldn't sleep for days remembering those white eyes. My grandparents wouldn't let me out of the house after that, even if it's just to play in the trees. Later I learned they were protecting me from a lesnik, a forest spirit which can take the form of a man or an owl or wolf. It hates when people go to his part of the woods and can kidnap you. I later learnt that the ox which took me there fallen ill and died almost immediately after. I used to do a ton of camping, but one night, still early on, I was up with two friends in the middle of the night, just hanging out in a field next to the campsite, looking at the stars and almost full moon. It was so bright outside, it's almost like a daytime moment. When suddenly, I noticed a faint whisper. I thought it was someone from camp, but no, it came from the other direction. We all went quiet and listened to the faintest "hey," to which we follow, cross the field away from the camp, and the whispers grow louder, but ever so slightly. That's until we come across a road. Across the road was a fenced-in area, but it's got a pretty bad fence. It's easily crossed. On the other side of the fences was a small woods. The trees are spaced pretty far apart from each other, and the moonlight's not really doing much. Now, it's pretty dark out there, under the trees. You could barely see past the first few rows, and now, the voice is much louder, but still, as if someone's trying to whisper. A voice that sounds like a girl saying, "Come play." craziest part is that there's no women with us on that trip, and we can just hear the sounds of a little girl whispering for us to come and play in the pitch blackness at 1 in the morning. We decided to not investigate any further. My father's family is from northern Peru. We have a house in a town and one in a beach nearby. I've heard this story when visiting the town as I was growing up. This happened to my father when he was 7 or 8 years old in the 70s. He had climbed a tall tree on a grove near town and was sitting on top of a big branch eating fruit. It was in the afternoon. There was lots of wind and the branches moved, but it was relaxing. Suddenly, he felt as though something's watching him. He focused and saw 2 eyes looking at him from a branch on another tree. He first only saw the eyes. He says that they're much bigger than a person's, hypnotic looking and intelligent. He then saw the rest of what appears to be a monkey or small person, and it looks terrified. He immediately jumps off and starts running into town. When he told his grandfather what he'd seen, he said it was a junda, like a goblin, and that they take away little children, especially those who have not been baptized. His grandfather was a farmer and saw many strange things on the fields out of town. This story happened in the 30s. The generation of my father's grandfather, a group of 4 men, had gone on horse to the Mont, like wild forest in the Stry area, and were returning to town at the end of daylight. The paths were such that they had to go one behind the other. Suddenly, they realise that the last man is missing. They decide to backtrack and first find the horse without the rider, and then him, on the ground passed out. They took him to town and he was babbling and crying but not coming to. A priest was taken to him. When he finally came to his senses, he said he had seen a bolto in the road. Bolto would translate into blob. This is just a mass occupying space that's much darker than its surroundings and far bigger than a person. He said that his horse refused to go anywhere near it, then remembering nothing else. Finally, this story was told to me from an uncle of mine. It was about a man walking back from the beach to the town at the end of daylight. The beach is separated from the town by a desert area with dunes and some small mountains. I think it's 500 meters, so it's about a 20-minute climb. The man was passing one of the mountains when he saw light coming from it. He got closer to the mountain and out of the road, and saw that the side of the mountain was open, and if there was a big doorway, and inside the mountain it was full, and there were fields of corn, but the corn was gold looking. He got closer to the doorway and thought he saw hooded men. The men were inviting him to come over, but he got a really bad feeling and went away, and could never find that area again afterwards. I guess I'll write what happened in chronological order. To preface this, I should mention that all of this took place back on my reservation. I'm from Algonquin First Nation from Canada. Another thing I should mention is that on the res, traditional beliefs and legends of the paranormal are still a big part of our community. The attitude of most people towards the paranormal is one of assurance. To us, the paranormal is a regular part of our life. We believe in a spirit world, and we believe that sometimes these beings can cross over from their world to ours. Well, I tell paranormal stories to my non-native friends. They're always in disbelief of what I tell them, but they've had no paranormal experiences, unlike me having a bunch, and most everyone I know on the res has had one. I don't really care to explain it, but it is what it is. Anyway, here's the story. This happened in the fall of 2011 when I was 16 years old. I was living in a nearby city with my mum, so I can get a better education than the one I can get at home. But we'd go back every single week to see my dad and little brother. One Friday, during the drive back home, I got a text from a friend of mine. She told me about a party that was happening that night, and she said to me, when am I going to be home so they can pick me up? I gave her a time, and that was that. When we got home, as soon as we stepped inside the house, I see my dad and cousins sitting at the kitchen table drinking. They're both cops on the res, so usually beers with his partner on a Friday evening happens. Means that they had a particularly tough week at work though. Typically, the toughest cases they deal with are ones around children. So a part of me felt sad immediately that something bad's happened. They both look tired and drained, but they're happy to see us. We say our greetings, catch up a little, and my dad asks me if I have any plans. I tell him about the party and where it'll be, and he and our cousin share a weird look. Why are you guys making that face? Did something happen? I say. I dunno, should we tell her? My cousin said, looking at my dad. He laughed and said, yeah, we probably should, because I'm gonna have to be going to a cottage pretty deep in the woods later that evening. They start off by saying the first strange call they get is on a Monday night. There's an elderly woman saying that there's people outside of her home knocking on all of her windows. She can't see anyone, but there must have been at least 3 people, judging by all the different locations of the knocking. They arrive at the woman's home, inspect all around the house, even the woods, but find nothing. They tell her that it's probably some teenagers playing tricks on her, but sadly there's nothing they can do really, besides patrol the area in case they come back. On Wednesday night, the same woman called again with the same problem. It had been raining that day too, and there was mud everywhere, so they figure at least they're gonna know where they went. But they don't find a thing. This is when they start feeling like something is off, because one of the windows where the woman was, she's adamant that there was someone there, but it's completely impossible to get there without going through a huge puddle. This is when they start to think she's lying, but they just told her the same thing they told her friend a few nights prior. By Thursday night, everyone on the res had been talking about these strange experiences. It turns out that she wasn't the only one experiencing it. She was just the one to call. I mean, all of this is taking place on a res, so it wasn't long before people were linking it to the supernatural. My dad still wasn't sure if it's just a group of teens playing a prank on people, but they get another call from the same woman for the same reason. They rush over there, but are met with the same situation, except this time, the neighbour walked over looking pale as a ghost. That's saying something for him. He says, "Is this about the knock-in?" They notice he's a little shaky. "Yeah." "Did you see something?" They ask him, and he nods and said, "You guys are gonna think I'm crazy, but yeah." And he goes on to explain what he saw. He said he stepped out for a cigarette on his front porch when he heard knocking. He looked around to see where it's coming from, and when he looked to his neighbour's house, he saw it. There's a black figure standing outside of the woman's window. The same one with the puddle, looking at her home. He said it looked humanoid in stature, but completely made out of a shadow. You could tell it was something solid-ish, but you cannot make out any features on it. He stared at it completely in shock, and watched that thing as it knocked a couple of times, then darted around the house knocking on every window, moving so quick it's like a blur, and it went around the house a few times. The man ran across the road into the tree line, behind one tree in particular. The man was frozen but couldn't look away. It then leaned out from behind the tree, staring directly at him with yellow eyes that reflected the light similar to a cat's, and then it smiled. showing its small but numerous pointed sharp teeth. I almost had a heart attack, he said while it happened. Fast forward to Friday. Stories are being exchanged all over the res about sightings and experiences people are having. On top of that, multiple people are experiencing the knock-in. There's also quite a few sightings with everyone describing the creature in the same way. One woman was bringing her trash to the side of the road, and she thought she saw the woman somewhere in her peripheral vision standing near the trees. She walks back up the driveway and into her home, feeling as though she's being watched. Right before she's about to open her door to go back inside to her home, she looked back and saw two reflective yellow eyes staring at her from the trees, saying it's about 5 feet above the ground. Another couple was driving at night and said they saw a humanoid figure too. "You sure you still want to go to that party?" my dad asked. But my friends were already pulling into the driveway. I gave my family hugs and kisses goodbye, and they told me to be careful, but I felt fine. A common belief among native people is that negative energy attracts negative energy. Therefore, an evil spirit will draw to people with unresolved issues, traumas, and sinners, I suppose. If you're someone who's spiritual, self-aware, and basically a good person, you're pretty good. So I get to the party, and within 20 minutes, the conversation shifts towards the paranormal experiences everyone's having. I'm really curious about what everyone has to say, because they have stories that I haven't heard yet, but my friend, being 17 and all, couldn't hold her alcohol very well, and was crying about how she wishes she was closer with her brother. I'm trying to make her feel better while listening to everyone else's stories. One of the people from the party was related to the neighbour of the woman who was calling the police. The experience really shook him up, and my friend was just explaining everything that was going on. For one, he smudged his entire home, which is something people do for extra protection from the paranormal. He also went on multiple visits to the elders around the community asking for advice. What we do know about paranormal experiences on the res is that they don't happen as much as they used to. If you talk to one of our elders, they'll have endless stories and even more advice to give about how to protect yourself. One of the explanations that was given to us is that the shadow guy is evidence that someone was doing unauthorized shaky tent ceremony. If you don't know what that is, it's basically like an Ouija board session that takes place inside of a tent. People stand around the tent while the medicine man or medicine woman goes inside asking questions. The tent begins to shake and you hear voices of the spirits coming through. I've never personally been to one because we haven't had a good enough reason to make one, but typically our ancestors use shaken tent ceremonies when they're starving in the dead of winter and need some direction on where the nearest food is. My mum's been to one. Her story's crazy. She described hearing multiple men and women only speaking native tongue, and they're upset that people were doing a shaken tent ceremony when they're not on the verge of death. The people there had to explain that they're only doing the ceremony to prove that it was real, as we'd been losing our culture as a result of residential schools. But the spirits are angry, saying that the bridge between the two worlds should never be opened unless necessary, because you don't know who you're talking to. It could be evil spirits. You don't know. Anyway, the elders told him that this spirit crossed over into our world because of a shaken tent ceremony. Someone on the res has been doing them without consultation of the elders, so we start thinking about who would do that without the proper guidance, and so. Then, two of the drunkest dudes say, "Oh, I'm not scared. That thing can't do anything," basically egging it all on, and we're all looking at each other like, why would you disrespect an evil spirit? That's exactly how it's attracted to you. And that's when I decide to leave the sunroom where everyone's hanging out. I went to the living room to console my drunk crying friend, when I noticed the rocking chair outside of the porch moving. I slowly moved away, refusing to make direct eye contact, but I do in my peripheral vision. Anyway, I'm inside the cottage and I keep seeing this rocking chair moving back and forth. But another thing we've raised to do in our culture is to ignore paranormal. Spirits feed on energy people give towards them, so if you freak out, if you get angry, if you start crying or yell at it, that's exactly what it wants. It thrives on energy of any kind. So while I knew something messed up was happening, I wasn't about to pay attention. 5 minutes now go by and I still see it out the corner of my eye. That's when my friend screams and she runs on the other side of the sunroom. My other friend, too, sprints to the girl, number 1, who's sitting and busts through the French doors onto the balcony. All of this happens in a split second, but I immediately go to the patio and ask what's going on. Girl 1 is crying on the couch with friends all around her. She claims to have seen the spirit. She said she was listening to the boys talk about the spirit when she saw boy 2's face as he was looking onto the balcony behind her. She turned around to see what he's looking at, and directly on the other side of the window was a shadow spirit on the rocking chair smiling at her, literally 3 feet away from her. That's when boy 2 sprinted towards it and burst through the French doors. I walk outside to find boy 2, and he's on the lawn, staring into the woods. I call his name and he looks up. All he says is, "Get everyone inside," and the tone of his voice makes me scared. I get all of us inside the cottage. This is when the phrase, "Come at me, bro," was gaining popularity. So you can imagine the drunk kid yelling that into the woods. It's terrible. I eventually get everyone inside. Boy 2 comes inside and tells everyone to clean up and that we should leave as soon as possible. Everyone has trash bags and we're clearing away the beer cans and whatever. Everyone goes inside the cottage and it's only me and boy 2 in the sunroom now. I look to him for answers and he says, "It's outside." I nod and start cleaning faster. The sooner we're out of here, the sooner we get away from that thing. As we're cleaning in the sunroom, we hear knocking on multiple windows. The entire sunroom's made of glass, but it's dark out, so you can't even see. And he says ignore it. I'm really scared now. Within 2 seconds, someone comes running out of the bathroom and says, "I'll kill whoever's knocking on the bathroom window." But everyone's accounted for. Someone else comes running out of the bedroom saying that there was knocking on the window as well. Everyone's freaking out, and me and boy 2 and our one other friend are the only sober ones now trying to calm people. We get the place clean and get outside and to the cars immediately. Everyone's getting into the trucks and I'm standing there. The guy looks relaxed, then all of a sudden looks worried and shoves me inside his truck. We peel out of there quick. A few days later, I end up hanging out with boy 2 and he tells me the story from his perspective. He said that when the boys started talking about the spirit, it appeared on the rocking chair behind girl 1. He said he made eye contact with it but couldn't look away. They were staring at each other, and that's when girl 1 and boy 2's expression changed. He said it was instinct to defend the people he's with and ran towards it. He said that the feeling he was getting from the cockgee was almost like daring him to do something. He said the second he got up, the cockgee stood up and ran into the woods, disappearing into a blur of the tree line. Boy 2 ran off the porch, looking around the lawn, when he saw it standing there, right next to the woods. It was smiling at him, and he heard it mocking him, calling his name, then disappearing. He didn't see it again until everyone was getting inside the trucks, which explains why he suddenly pushed me inside. He said it was standing on the far end of the truck, super close to us. Later that night, when he dropped everyone off, they realised that they never locked the doors. So he went back to the cottage, but his friend was too scared to go in, so he goes in on his own. But the second he opens the door, he sees that thing standing inside. He locks the door as quick as he can, and they peel out of there. The sightings continued for a few days after that. We definitely weren't the only people on the res to have them kind of experiences. It was the talk of the res. Everyone was curious about what happened. Would it come back? What was it? All I know is that it terrified us, and it's 2018 now, and no one else has seen anything like it since. So one of my best friends and I met when we're 10 in 4th grade in 2009. A common theme in our friendship is horror. We both loved and got off immediately watching and playing scary video games together. At the time it was SCP on his laptop. Now fast forward until the summer of the senior year in high school. We drive up to this area of New Jersey called Hope Township. It's a really desolate farm area. Very few people out there. There's an area of road called Shades of Death. This is something we've looked into for years and always wanted to go to. It's about an hour drive from where we are in NJ. I remember it was rainy and extremely misty this one chilly July night. We get there and it's around 9 PM now. We're rolling down this long 10-mile desolate road when we spot a car going about 15 miles per hour in front of us. Keep in mind, we're in rural New Jersey roads. 40 miles per hour is the limit, and high beams are acceptable. We start going at their pace to match them. I keep telling him how weird this is as we're driving. He's looking at his phone for a couple of minutes saying they're probably just some old people. Then, we see a kid around our age turn his head and stare at us, absolutely fixated. My eyes have been glued on the road, so I decide to point this out to my friend, and I've realised that the car is packed with teenagers and another 4 stare at us. My friend says that he feels worried, as suddenly another car's behind us, also going the same speed. I get it was off, but I didn't really think how dangerous the situation is until the next day after we went home after my boy crashed at my house. I eventually passed the car in front of us and speed up to loosen sight of them and peel off into a desolate road, and we see that they're following us. We managed to get away from them eventually and went back up the road again to explore the state reserve Jenny Jump State Forest, which is another story. But the next day, we hear on the news that some gang members have brutally murdered innocent people who are walking through the forest with knives. To this day, we still reflect on how badly the situation could have gone, and we're so thankful that nothing ever happened to us there. Back when I was 16, me and my friends spent a lot of time together at a caravan site on the outskirts of my town. One of my friends, Jack, had a little cabin there that his parents owned. We spent most of our evenings at the cabin, drinking and hanging out. We'd have the occasional barbecue or party, but mostly it's just a chill place to relax. Now one night, it was one of my friend's birthdays, so naturally we head there to go drinking. It was about 10 PM, so when we realised we'd run out of alcohol, the oldest one of us, or looking the oldest, Nathan and Tom, both volunteered to pop to the nearest corner store to get some drinks. While they were gone, we listened to music and play Xbox and have a good time. Just less than an hour went by before we heard a loud banging on the window. I pulled back the curtains with a wide grin on my face, thinking it's Nathan and Tom back with the drinks trying to scare us. So I decided to stick my tongue out and close the curtains. They can come in whenever they wanted, the door's open. Suddenly, A bang come from the window again, followed by a series of loud and violent bangs on the other side of the cabin. We then heard a man's voice shout out angrily, "Are you in there? And this isn't Nathan and Tom's." Jack's kind of worried and gets up to see what's going on. He just opened the door when a bald, stocky man in his 50s grabs Jack by the scruff of the neck. We don't know what to do. The man just shook Jack and yelled at him. I can't hear what he's saying, but he's absolutely furious. Then, the banging started up again. There were more men circling the cabin, smashing on the walls and windows. Me and my friends just stood on the edge of the room, as far away from the windows as we could, not doing or saying anything while Jack was being beaten outside. In hindsight, we should have helped him, but hell, from the sounds of it, there were 10 or so men outside and we're not gonna face them. One of them shouting, "I'm gonna kill him, I'm gonna kill him," over and over again. We couldn't even call the police because we'd spent the whole evening underage drinking by ourselves. I text Nathan and Tom to let them know what's happening and not to come back to the cabin, but they had arrived just as the men were hiding around the back. After what seemed like hours, it was probably only 30 minutes. It went silent. We tentatively went to open the door, but the men and Jack were gone. Worried about our friend, we all went looking for him and found him sat at the far end of the caravan, hands in his head. We asked if he's okay and he says go away. After that, we go back to the cabin in silence, waiting for him. He didn't come back. He stopped showing up for school. Turns out, he'd had a breakdown following that incident and spent a long time locked in his room. We only found out about this from his parents. I haven't spoke to Jack in years, and we never went back to the cabin following that night. I don't know who those men are or what they wanted with Jack, but it was a horrible experience. I remember a time when I was almost abducted as a kid. I lived in my grandmother's house out in the middle of nowhere in Texas. Our neighbours lived closer to the main country road, and my grandmother's house is at the back of a 5-acre lot. Across the street is an army depot. There's nothing but woods surrounding all of this. Now my parents are at work and my grandparents are in the house watching the Golden Girls. Now my grandfather bought me a bike as a gift. It was just as I turned 9 for my birthday. So I was riding my bike up our long driveway. Our neighbours to the left, a really old elderly woman. She had no one to visit her and talk to her, so often I played at her house and helped her with anything she wanted. That day, I want to show her my bike. She was sitting on her porch when I visit her. She had no errands or chores for me, so I talked to her for about 15 minutes and showed her my bike. Then, I returned to my own driveway. I had been riding back and forth for about 15 minutes, listening to music on my MP3 player, when I had this sudden nauseating pain in my gut. I look around, only to find a car passing by. I recognise it as my elderly neighbour's car and wave to her. She stopped long enough to talk to me. She then pulls into her driveway, just far enough that the tail end of her car wasn't in the street, and a white van marked with some electricity company's name and ladder on the roof passes by. Now in our area, there's only one electric company. The truck's not ours, so I think it's weird, but dismiss it to talk to the neighbour. A good 10 minutes go by when I noticed the van was driving by once more and going in the direction it had come from. Maybe he was lost, I thought, and I kept talking to my neighbour. She gave me a bag of her garden tomatoes and cucumbers for my grandmother before telling me to run home. I watched her as she drove away. Then that sudden pain returned. I'd forgotten all about it. I look up to see the white van was driving in my direction, much quicker than it had done so before. Something inside me screamed to run, to do something. Whatever it was, I had to get away from it fast. I dropped my bags and ran across a small pasture to my elderly neighbour's house. She was no longer on the porch, but her house was much closer than my grandmother's. As I hopped over my neighbour's fence, the van sped up as it cut to my neighbour's driveway. I made a quick decision to run up the steps instead of running around the front of the house. My neighbour had a long wrap-around porch and her driveway small. If he had intentions on kidnapping me, it would have been too easy for him to catch me trying to run around the front of the house. I have tears in my eyes as my neighbour locked her doors and calls the police. She'd seen everything and calls my grandfather. It would have taken way too long for the police to come. My neighbour put me in her room and locked the door behind herself. Moments later, I heard banging on the front door. As terrified as I was, I looked out her bedroom window to see a tall and lean man standing on the porch. He looks like Michael Myers, aviator sunglasses and a dark beard that looks like a disguise. He bangs on the door, walking around the house. He was looking in the windows when my grandfather arrived, but the moment he saw him, he ran back to his van and sped off, never to be seen again. I'm 25 now and thankfully I never saw that van again. I hope I never do. I'm a child of the mountains and my hometown was completely mountainous, so I spent most of my childhood running through the forests and stuff. And one event that happened when I was 10 remains unexplained. I was on top of the ridge several hundreds of feet above my house when I started hearing my biological father yelling. In a very redneck area, he had a very distinct voice with no accent, so it's not really possible to confuse him for anyone else. His voice was coming from the other side of the ridge, which is a bit weird in retrospect because nobody over that way actually lived in that area and everyone avoided everyone in there. Even when hunting, we'd go around. The train was worse to deal with, but it's what we done. He starts calling my name, so I go down there, but the voice isn't getting any closer. I start feeling dread washing over me, and I suddenly remember my father's on a trip to Germany. I've never ran so fast. I didn't realise it until I got to the other side of the ridge, but the forest had been completely silent on the other side of the ridge, which never happens unless there's predators or the wind picks up. Normally, I'd think I was just getting closer to black bear territory, but the voice obviously makes it confusing. Unlike a number of stories like this I've heard over the years, the experience didn't really stop me from going into the woods. It just made me more curious. I've never had an explanation for it since, and it kind of worries me. The closest thing I've heard it could be is like a skinwalker, but I'm not sure. It may even be a person who is trying to stalk me in, but I guess I'll never know. Hey everyone. About 2 weeks ago, I had a really scary experience and my husband didn't believe me, but last night, he had a very similar experience and now we're both wondering what we could have possibly seen. So our puppy was barking to go outside and use the bathroom. It's about 4 or 5 AM. I took him out and stood on the steps of our deck because I didn't want to get my feet wet. My dog was using the bathroom when I looked up and I see something across the yard. It was slowly walking towards me, one step at a time. Its eyes were super reflective. I thought it was a deer, but its eyes were so tall and staring at me, and it wasn't running away. I hurried the dog up and we ran inside. I have reoccurring night terrors, so at first, my husband thinks it's just that, but I was crying and shaking and could barely be spoken to. He tells me it's probably a deer, but I wasn't convinced, and I refused to take the dog out after midnight again. As for my husband's experience, It was early in the morning, about 5 a.m. The dog was barking and he took him outside. Once again, my husband stood on the deck outside. He didn't have his glasses, but when he looks up, he saw something tall standing in the forest near our backyard. He said he saw it walking slowly, almost gliding. He said that the moment he made eye contact, his nose was bleeding. My husband is typically not prone to them either. He said he wanted to get a closer look but felt the need to go inside, almost like an instinct. My husband's a zookeeper. He's not really afraid of animals and can recognize many of them. I still have no idea what this is. We live in Eastern PA. This happened around the 1900s in the countryside of South Brazil. My grandmother's grandfather was coming home from a ball very late at night. He lived in a small farm, and so to come from the party place he had a long way to walk in the middle of nothing, with just trees and bushes. And well, you can imagine how the countryside of Brazil was, especially back then. He said that while he was walking, all of a sudden he heard strange noises and lights. Scared, he hid in the bushes to see what was happening. He said there were very little men speaking in a foreign language. Behind him, there was two huge plates stacked on top of another, with lights all over them. He stayed hiding and praying until they left and ran for his life. My grandmother says that she's heard this story a few times in her youth from him, and the narrative always stayed the same, with him praying after. Only after she married and moved to the big city and had children did she start to hear about these things being known as aliens and other things. Her grandfather at the time would have had no concept of aliens. After a heavy night of drinking and camping, we woke up and nobody wanted to make breakfast, so we decided to drive into town and find a diner. We're approaching where the dirt meets the pavement and come up on dozens of sheriffs backloading the road, two of which have rifles pointed towards us. We stop the truck about 40 feet from them and hear them yell over the intercom to stick our hands up now. They then instruct us to approach on foot with our hands in the air. They search my truck and find it full of loaded guns and beer. That's when they tell us that a Forest Service agent had been shot and killed nearby, and eventually let us go, but tell us our camping gear is out of bounds until the murderer is found. We didn't want to leave our camping gear and go home, so we ended up at a nearby casino, continuing partying there. A few hours later, someone in the casino says there's loads of cops outside. We go outside and there must have been 100 sheriffs, local PD everywhere. Apparently, that same murderer had stopped at the casino gas station and an officer recognized him. Then LEO drew his gun, murderer went for his and the LEO shot him dead. We went back to the camp and home the next day. I checked the newspaper articles and they made a map of where the murder happened, and it's only 200 yards away from our campsite. I have a friend who's a trail ranger. He's basically a ranger who can't get you in trouble. He told me about this time he was gathering illegally placed wildlife cameras and knocking them down and whatnot. The other ranger wasn't feeling well, so he said he was going to head back, but it's a 1-hour ATV ride. My friend finished up the last one when he hears voices. He kept in mind that he's far off the beaten path. He calls out and no one replies. As it was getting dark, he starts to head back and found his ATV won't start. He then realizes that the batteries are not connected. He reconnects it and started to drive but isn't going fast. Less than half a mile later, the whole thing died. He radioed back saying, "Hey guys, someone pick me up." They said they would do it but are gonna take an hour. He said, "Can the other guy come back?" and he said no. So he settled down, made a small fire, but heard voices again. It's dark and he's angry. The voices sound like an argument now. Someone was angry, yelling at someone else who sounded scared. He called out and said, "Does anyone need help?" The voices don't care. He thinks they're less than 1,000 feet away. He radioed again, and they said they're having trouble finding what path he'd be on, and haven't left yet. He said to them just to get another ranger there. About 3 minutes go by, and the voices start again. He decides to walk there, hoping maybe there's some drunk people that have a map. He walks in their direction, but the voices seem to be getting further away as he got closer. Finally, 20 minutes later, he gave up and walks back. He got a radio call, and they said the other guy was passed out, covered in vomit, and was taken to hospital. They don't know exactly where I come from still because he crossed off everywhere that he went. Then the radio died, and the voices came back. Bored out of his mind, he decides to listen to what they're arguing about, and picks up on things like, "Well, it wasn't yours to take, and I knew you were gonna do this, you idiot, and I don't care." His guess is that 2 hunters are arguing over a kill. Then he heard something intelligible. Then silence. Bang. A gunshot. He doused his fire and hid. After that he heard nothing. Just his breathing for the next half hour until he saw ATV lights. He told the guy picking him up everything, and they called back. They had people looking for 3 hours but found nothing. They came back the next day with police and dogs. After about an hour, a shallow grave was found, and a man who'd been shot in the head was also found. Thing was, it was a skeleton who had been there for years. So either the argument he heard was somehow from the past, or someone else got murdered recently when he was there. This happened while I was doing my army service in Switzerland. I'm not allowed to talk about exactly what we were doing there, but I'll try and keep this clear. My company has installed a huge antenna, and it has to be guarded day and night. So we're on a hill, away from a city near a massive forest. It's 1800 hours, and I had just started my watch of 6 hours with another soldier. Everything's fine. We smoke cigarettes and keep ourselves occupied until our night watch ends. Then, we receive a call from our superior who said that one of the soldiers that's supposed to watch hasn't come out, and we have to stay for another 6 hours. So we tossed a coin to see who's going to stay from midnight till 6 AM with temperatures of -20. And of course I lost. And I had to wait for the other soldiers to come and join me for the rest of the night. They sent Jon Snow. No, I'm just kidding. They've only sent another soldier, but not the best because I knew he would sleep all night when I saw him climbing the hill with his sleeping bag. And that's what he did. He immediately took place in the tent and fell asleep. It was the coldest and longest night of my life. Nothing special about it. The weirdest part though happened in the morning. We received another call from our superior telling us that we had an NBC exercise. It means that we have to wear all-day chemical suits. The one with the gas mask and everything. I was really upset and exhausted because I wasn't able to sleep with that thing on, and sleep was my only reward for the 12-hour watch. Well, I get out of this tent, and I saw this thing that still scares me to this day. I see a woman standing next to the antenna. She wasn't moving, she was just standing there, meters from my tent. I couldn't see her face because of the sun starting to rise behind her. I knew she's a woman because she had really long hair. Remember that we're in the middle of nowhere and she's standing there, not moving like she's frozen. I start to freak out and call the other guy to see what I'm looking at. I don't know why, but he wasn't scared at all, and he told her to leave. But she didn't. She just stood there staring at us. I was confused. How could a woman ignore two soldiers in a forbidden area? I mean, we're in Switzerland. The army's not that impressive, I know, but people usually don't do this kind of thing. They would just move away, especially when it's 6 in the morning. And what she's doing in the middle of nowhere is beyond me, not dressed for cold climate. How long was she there? And how did she get there? I don't even see any footsteps. So, there's so many questions running through my head. The other soldier didn't think twice and starts walking towards her. When he almost reaches her, she starts running very fast into the forest. I see her going deep into the forest and I never see her again. I'm a really rational thinker, but I have absolutely no explanation for this. Thank God there was someone there with me, because nobody would have believed me if it was just me there at that time. My father told me a story many times when I was growing up of something that happened to him. I know he believes it to be true, and he's not a very superstitious person whatsoever. Very analytical on the other hand. My dad was 5 years old, camping with the Boy Scout troop. They sent everyone for firewood. It was dusk, so he went off on his own and a little further than the other kids. He wanted to gather more firewood than anyone else. He got far enough away that nobody else had picked through the fallen wood and started gathering. Along his way, he went until he almost stepped on a tiny tribe of Indians, moving around a fire, dancing. He said they were tiny, and they didn't pay him any attention as he crouched down to look at them. He ran over to go and tell his friends, but by the time he come back, they're all gone. He said he's never seen anything like it in his life, and he was sure someone was playing a prank on him, but how? How could somebody make a prank look that real? I live near a very large, very popular national park. Locals here, like myself, are pretty aware of the goings on here. Strange sounds, weird creatures, and strange disappearances. I've dealt with these in my past times and hikes, and even just relaxing in the park. Here's one that still freaks me out to this day. I was at my grandma's house that's deep in the Bonnies, and the only road there is a gravel road that's washed away. Without a good car, you're not getting anywhere. My cousins lived in a trailer with their mums, right below my grandma's. We played all sorts of games, which mainly involved me getting chased, being the youngest. My grandma was in hospital with my aunt, so our oldest cousin, who I'll call Dee, had to watch us. Dee was, and still is, the only cousin that's older than us that we still hold in high regards. He would mess with us and play around, but actually cared about us. The whole day we were playing around, but we would usually play more at night, like hide and seek, etc. We'd been playing pretty far away from the house and it was starting to get dark. We decided to go back to the house and grab flashlights and play manhunt. Of course, I was the one being hunted. So I ran pretty far into the woods on the other side of the property, hiding behind a log. I heard my cousins getting closer, so I ran and they saw me. We ended up running to the very back of the property line, and we saw my cousin D. He looked at us and kinda growled. We all ran from him, thinking it's a game. We ran back to the gravel road when we saw him walk out of the tree line, but he did in a weird way, gloatingly in fact. We ran into the house and decided to barricade the door to play a prank on him. We moved a couple of things in front of the door, but decided to move the big coffee table in front of it too. As we loudly scooted the table, they come into the living room from the bedroom. We had obviously woke him up, and We said we saw him chasing us, and he got wide-eyed. He said stay in the bedroom. We sat in the bedroom for about 20 minutes, and he come in and told us not to worry, that he's just scaring us. It wasn't until 4 years later, when I was 13, he told me the truth. He's pretty certain that it was a skinwalker. He told me he's dealt with it before and was terrified it hunted us, and he was too scared to tell me at the time because I'd get worried. So with a few fraternity brothers and I are backpacking in the Nafala National Park and met some guys. They're locals. I mean, not local hangout bros, but local backwoods people who lived there for generations, hate the government and society types. These are guys that have apparently been helping Eric Rudolph, the Olympic bomber, hide in the national forest by supplying him with food drops. Really weird drunken conversations. They actually took us to one of the hideout drop-off caves. They were too serious, and that's the whole reason that I hated this. They trusted us because some things were said to make them think we're of a similar mindset. Anyway, we parted ways. Spent a few days trying to figure out if it is all lies or not. And that same week, they call Eric Rudolph in the dumpster of a Piggy Wiggly 3 miles from where we met the guys. Every single thing these guys said matched up with the news story. We gave them the bottle of Jack even. They said they'd give it to Eric. Creepy as hell. Hauntingly terrifying in retrospect. So when I was about 5 years old, I was at my sister's graduation party. My father had rented out a pavilion at a heavy wooded area of Country Park. I ended up following some kids throughout the forest, and after a while, I realised I wandered too far from the pavilion and started heading back. I remember not being able to find my way back and ended up being lost for around an hour. As I was walking, a man dressed in white from head to toe appeared to me. He said his name was John. I explained to him that I was lost and told him where my family was. I remember him accompanying me throughout the woods, and he had a very comforting presence about him. After a while, I remembered hearing my uncles calling for me from a distance. I turned to tell John that that's my uncle, but he was gone. I turned the other way, and there was my uncle. I'm 30 now, but can't help wonder exactly what John was and what the meaning of all of this was. I guess I'll write what happened in chronological order. To preface this, I should mention that all of this took place back on my reservation. I'm from Algonquin First Nation from Canada. Another thing I should mention is that on the res, traditional beliefs and legends of the paranormal are still a big part of our community. The attitude of most people towards the paranormal is one of assurance. To us, the paranormal is a regular part of our life. We believe in a spirit world, and we believe that sometimes these beings can cross over from their world to ours. Well, I tell paranormal stories to my non-native friends. They're always in disbelief of what I tell them, but they've had no paranormal experiences, unlike me having a bunch, and most everyone I know on the res has had one. I don't really care to explain it, but it is what it is. Anyway, here's the story. This happened in the fall of 2011 when I was 16 years old. I was living in a nearby city with my mum, so I can get a better education than the one I can get at home. But we'd go back every single week to see my dad and little brother. One Friday, during the drive back home, I got a text from a friend of mine. She told me about a party that was happening that night, and she said to me when am I going to be home so they can pick me up. I gave her a time and that was that. When we got home, as soon as we stepped inside the house, I see my dad and cousins sitting at the kitchen table drinking. They're both cops on the res, so usually beers with his partner on a Friday evening happens. Means that they had a particularly tough week at work though. Typically, the toughest cases they deal with are ones around children. So a part of me felt sad immediately that something bad's happened. They both look tired and drained, but they're happy to see us. We say our greetings, catch up a little, and my dad asks me if I have any plans. I tell him about the party and where it'll be, and he and our cousin share a weird look. Why are you guys making that face? Did something happen? I say. I don't know, should we tell her? My cousin said, looking at my dad. He laughed and said, yeah, we probably should, because I'm gonna have to be going to a cottage pretty deep in the woods later that evening. They start off by saying the first strange call they get is on a Monday night. There's an elderly woman saying that there's people outside of her home knocking on all of her windows. She can't see anyone, but there must have been at least 3 people, judging by all the different locations of the knocking. They arrive at the woman's home, inspect all around the house, even the woods, but find nothing. They tell her that it's probably some teenagers playing tricks on her, but sadly there's nothing they can do really, besides patrol the area in case they come back. On Wednesday night, the same woman called again with the same problem. It had been raining that day too, and there was mud everywhere, so they figure at least they're gonna know where they went. But they don't find a thing. This is when they start feeling like something is off, because one of the windows where the woman was, she's adamant that there was someone there, but it's completely impossible to get there without going through a huge puddle. This is when they start to think she's lying, but they just told her the same thing they told her friend a few nights prior. By Thursday night, everyone on the res had been talking about these strange experiences. It turns out that she wasn't the only one experiencing it. She was just the one to call. I mean, all of this is taking place on a res, so it wasn't long before people were linking it to the supernatural. My dad still wasn't sure if it's just a group of teens playing a prank on people, but they get another call from the same woman for the same reason. They rush over there, but are met with the same situation, except this time, the neighbour walked over looking pale as a ghost. That's saying something for him. He says, "Is this about the knock-in?" They notice he's a little shaky. "Yeah. Did you see something?" They ask him, and he nods and said, "You guys are gonna think I'm crazy, but yeah." And he goes on to explain what he saw. He said he stepped out for a cigarette on his front porch when he heard knocking. He looked around to see where it's coming from, and when he looked to his neighbour's house, he saw it. There's a black figure standing outside of the woman's window. The same one with the puddle, looking at her home. He said it looked humanoid in stature, but completely made out of a shadow. You could tell it was something solid-ish, but you cannot make out any features on it. He stared at it completely in shock, and watched that thing as it knocked a couple of times, then darted around the house knocking on every window, moving so quick it's like a blur, and it went around the house a few times. The man ran across the road into the tree line, behind one tree in particular. The man was frozen but couldn't look away. It then leaned out from behind the tree, staring directly at him with yellow eyes that reflected the light similar to a cat's, and then it smiled, showing its small but numerous pointed sharp teeth. "I almost had a heart attack," he said while it happened. Fast forward to Friday. Stories are being exchanged all over the res about sightings and experiences people are having. On top of that, multiple people are experiencing the knock-in. There's also quite a few sightings with everyone describing the creature in the same way. One woman was bringing her trash to the side of the road, and she thought she saw the woman somewhere in her peripheral vision standing near the trees. She walks back up the driveway and into her home, feeling as though she's being watched. Right before she's about to open her door to go back inside to her home, she looked back and saw two reflective yellow eyes staring at her from the trees, saying it's about 5 feet above the ground. Another couple was driving at night and said they saw a humanoid figure too. "You sure you still want to go to that party?" my dad asked. But my friends were already pulling into the driveway. I gave my family hugs and kisses goodbye, and they told me to be careful, but I felt fine. A common belief among native people is that negative energy attracts negative energy. Therefore, an evil spirit will draw to people with unresolved issues, traumas, and sinners, I suppose. If you're someone who's spiritual, self-aware, and basically a good person, you're pretty good. So I get to the party, and within 20 minutes, the conversation shifts towards the paranormal experiences everyone's having. I'm really curious about what everyone has to say, because they have stories that I haven't heard yet, but my friend, being 17 and all, couldn't hold her alcohol very well, and was crying about how she wishes she was closer with her brother. I'm trying to make her feel better while listening to everyone else's stories. One of the people from the party was related to the neighbour of the woman who was calling the police. The experience really shook him up, and my friend was just explaining everything that was going on. For one, he smudged his entire home, which is something people do for extra protection from the paranormal. He also went on multiple visits to the elders around the community asking for advice. What we do know about paranormal experiences on the res is that they don't happen as much as they used to. If you talk to one of our elders, they'll have endless stories and even more advice to give about how to protect yourself. One of the explanations that was given to us is that the shadow guy is evidence that someone was doing unauthorized shaky tent ceremony. If you don't know what that is, it's basically like an Ouija board session that takes place inside of a tent. People stand around the tent while the medicine man or medicine woman goes inside asking questions. The tent begins to shake and you hear voices of the spirits coming through. I've never personally been to one because we haven't had a good enough reason to make one, but typically our ancestors use shaken tent ceremonies when they're starving in the dead of winter and need some direction on where the nearest food is. My mum's been to one. Her story's crazy. She described hearing multiple men and women only speak in native tongue, and they're upset that people were doing a shaken tent ceremony when they're not on the verge of death. The people there had to explain that they're only doing the ceremony to prove that it was real, as we'd been losing our culture as a result of residential schools. But the spirits are angry, saying that the bridge between the two worlds should never be opened unless necessary, because you don't know who you're talking to. It could be evil spirits. You don't know. Anyway, the elders told him that this spirit crossed over into our world because of a shaken tent ceremony. Someone on the res has been doing them without consultation of the elders, so we start thinking about who would do that without the proper guidance, and so. Then, two of the drunkest dudes say, "Oh, I'm not scared. That thing can't do anything," basically egging it all on, and we're all looking at each other like, why would you disrespect an evil spirit? That's exactly how it's attracted to you. And that's when I decided to leave the sunroom where everyone's hanging out. I went to the living room to console my drunk crying friend when I noticed the rocking chair outside of the porch moving. I slowly moved away, refusing to make direct eye contact, but I do in my peripheral vision. Anyway, I'm inside the cottage and I keep seeing this rocking chair moving back and forth. But another thing we're raised to do in our culture is to ignore paranormal. Spirits feed on energy people give towards them, so if you freak out, if you get angry, If you start crying or yell at it, that's exactly what it wants. It thrives on energy of any kind. So while I knew something messed up was happening, I wasn't about to pay attention. 5 minutes now go by and I still see it out the corner of my eye. That's when my friend screams and she runs on the other side of the sunroom. My other friend, too, sprints to the girl, number 1, who's sitting, and busts through the French doors onto the balcony. All of this happens in a split second, but I immediately go to the patio and ask what's going on. Girl 1 is crying on the couch with friends all around her. She claims to have seen the spirit. She said she was listening to the boys talk about the spirit when she saw boy 2's face as he was looking onto the balcony behind her. She turned around to see what he's looking at, and directly on the other side of the window was the shadow spirit on the rocking chair smiling at her, literally 3 feet away from her. That's when boy 2 sprinted towards it and burst through the French doors. I walk outside to find boy 2, and he's on the lawn, staring into the woods. I call his name and he looks up. All he says is, "Get everyone inside." And the tone of his voice makes me scared. I get all of us inside the cottage. This is when the phrase, "Come at me, bro," was gaining popularity. So you can imagine the drunk kid yelling that into the woods. It's terrible. I eventually get everyone inside. Boy 2 comes inside and tells everyone to clean up and that we should leave as soon as possible. Everyone has trash bags and we're clearing away the beer cans and whatever. Everyone goes inside the cottage and it's only me and boy 2 in the sunroom now. I look to him for answers and he says, "It's outside." I nod and start cleaning faster. The sooner we're out of here, the sooner we get away from that thing. As we're cleaning in the sunroom, we hear knocking on multiple windows. The entire sunroom's made of glass, but it's dark out, so you can't even see. And he says ignore it. I'm really scared now. Within 2 seconds, someone comes running out of the bathroom and says, "I'll kill whoever's knocking on the bathroom window." But everyone's accounted for. Someone else comes running out of the bedroom saying that there was knocking on the window as well. Everyone's freaking out, and me and boy 2 and our one other friend are the only sober ones now trying to calm people. We get the place clean and get outside and to the cars immediately. Everyone's getting into the trucks and I'm standing there. The guy looks relaxed, then all of a sudden looks worried and shoves me inside his truck. We peel out of there quick. A few days later, I end up hanging out with boy 2 and he tells me the story from his perspective. He said that when the boys started talking about the spirit, it appeared on the rocking chair behind girl 1. He said he made eye contact with it but couldn't look away. They were staring at each other, and that's when girl 1 and boy 2's expression changed. He said it was instinct to defend the people he's with and ran towards it. He said that the feeling he was getting from the cockgee was almost like daring him to do something. He said the second he got up, the cockgee stood up and ran into the woods, disappearing into a blur of the tree line. Boy 2 ran off the porch, looking around the lawn, when he saw it standing there, right next to the woods. It was smiling at him, and he heard it mocking him, calling his name, then disappearing. He didn't see it again until everyone was getting inside the trucks, which explains why he suddenly pushed me inside. He said it was standing on the far end of the truck, super close to us. Later that night, when he dropped everyone off, they realized that they never locked the doors. So he went back to the cottage, but his friend was too scared to go in, so he goes in on his own. But the second he opens the door, he sees that thing standing inside. He locks the door as quick as he can, and they peel out of there. The sightings continued for a few days after that. We definitely weren't the only people on the res to have them kind of experiences. It was the talk of the res. Everyone was curious about what happened. Would it come back? What was it? All I know is that it terrified us, and it's 2018 now, and no one else has seen anything like it since. So, one of the things I'd like to say before my story is that I put the Wendigo in quotes because I live in Central California in historically Milwaukee land, which, from what little I know about Wendigos, is quite away from where they're normally seen. So, if someone knows anything similar, I'd like to hear it. But yeah, 2 years ago, I and a group of 3 other friends decided to go to Humboldt County for a weekend. We go, see Fern Canyon, tour the HSU campus, and have a fun 4-day weekend camping on the beach. On Sunday it's time to come home. It was a 12-hour drive to where I was dropping my friends off, which I drove for the entire duration of. By the time I drop them off and start the last hour of the long drive back to my home, it's a little after 9 PM and completely after dark. Now, the 2 routes that somebody can take between my friend's house and where I live is across 2 different bridges and over a lake. I decide to take the main highway as it's a little longer than the drive on the other road but fewer turns to navigate. The difference between the 2 routes was only about 2 miles or so, and as I'm about halfway across the bridge, I notice in my headlights that there's something on the shoulder. I slow down a bit to make sure that I'm able to move over if necessary. As I get closer, I'm able to make out what it is. Standing on the side of the road was about a 7 to 8 feet tall, humanoid creature. It looked emaciated with a ghost white skin that stretched across its bones. Obviously, I wasn't going to stop and get a closer look, but I've stopped and looked in the rearview mirror now, and trying to see if I can see any features of it, but there's none. It had completely vanished. The rest of my drive home was uneventful, and when I woke up the next morning, I brushed off what I saw as exhaustion from the long weekend drive, and the 12 hours of driving before seeing the thing. That is until Tuesday, when I was talking with one of my friends who had gone on this trip. She told me that one of her friends had been driving over that bridge and saw a creature exactly like I had seen. That was when I told her what I'd seen the night before, and she suggested it may have been a Wendigo. Before then, I'd maybe heard the name of it once or twice, but didn't pay much attention, as I wasn't interested in cryptids or ghosts or anything really. But what I saw was definitely bizarre and something that I can't explain. Now, these are some strange experiences from a camping trip in northern Ontario I went on back when I was a little kid with my dad and stepmom. I want to preface this by saying that despite the things I've written about, it was still a good time. My parents split when I was younger, and I didn't exactly live with my dad. I still got to see him though, and these kinds of trips were a bonding experience where we always had fun. I just don't want that to overshadow the story. Now, onto the story. My stepmom and dad rented a tiny cabin in northern Ontario one summer through a family friend. I don't know exactly where it was, but I'm certain it was well in the north of Midland, the regular cottage country for Toronto folks. The cabin's on a lake and owned by somebody who has a tiny motorboat there which is ferried up. There wasn't an island, mind you. I think there was just not any roads to access it. Some strange things happened on this trip, and while there isn't a single cohesive timeline here, I'm not an experienced writer, but I've specified things to make it clear. So 1, the owner had left a canoe at the cabin, and we took it out for a lot of trips to the lake, usually to use later in the day. I was obsessed with frogs and fish and wildlife as a kid, and this lake was loaded with marshes, so I loved these outings. I remembered one in particular. It was almost sunset and we were heading back through one of the marshes, and I heard a faint humming, similar to a transformer coming from the tree line to the shore. Now my stepmom/dad noticed it getting louder too. It stopped all of a sudden a few moments later, but so did everything else. The sounds of birds, frogs, and any wildlife completely stopped. Nothing else strange happened on the way back, but it was creepy as hell. Now the cabin was on the shoreline, but there wasn't any beach or anything close to one. It was actually a very steep and rocky shore around the entire area, but once you got into the water there was sand. Mussels and crayfish actually thrive in there, and my dad got the idea to catch some for cooking. Now my dad isn't a woodsman by any means, but he's a very crafty and resourceful person. So we canoed to a sandy area close to the shore and waded in to catch mussels. On both sides of the water here, the shore was very steep and rocky, like 2 floors up with thick forest at the top. At some point during our escapade, I caught a glimpse of something along the trees on the opposite side of the shore. I couldn't make it out very well, but it was white, almost like the texture of birch, and very lanky. I remembered thinking that it was definitely not a person, but it wasn't too far from the general shape of one. It was staggering around lethargically and slowly. If it was an animal, then something was definitely wrong with it. I waded over to my dad and told him to look up there, and by that point it was gone. Because of this, I'm not 100% sure that it could have been a real thing or not, but I don't know, I saw it so definitively, and I remembered seeing it again on the opposite side of the shore on the way back. Now this one I don't actually remember, instead my dad told me about. It was one of our canoe outings. My dad and stepmom decided to visit this little peninsula on the other side of the lake close to the marshes area. We all got there and dragged the canoe onto the little shore, and there wasn't a path, but the trees weren't particularly dense either, though there was enough to see water when you look back. Now pretty soon, he notices that the entire place is covered in mushrooms, and live trees had given way to dead/drowned trees further inland. This was unusual because it didn't look like there had been a forest fire or anything. They were just dead. Now, it also started smelling like really, really bad, and not wanting to endanger us by going further, we all turned back. He didn't want to let on that he was nervous because I was young at the time, but he told me that obviously it freaked the hell out of him. We stayed clear of the peninsula for the rest of the trip. Now, this is something my dad told me happened to him during his trip a couple of years ago. He said that he went hiking by himself at some point, and he was deeper into the woods, and everything around him just stopped. No sound whatsoever and no movement, no wind or leaves falling. It all returned a minute later, and nothing else eventful happened for the rest of the hike. This one isn't really as scary as much as weird, I guess. Now, we spent most nights having fires outside. Now one night my dad and I stayed up watching X-Files on this tiny black and white TV. I'm actually not sure how this place even had power since it wasn't accessible by road. Maybe it had a generator, or even a small PV/battery setup for all I know. There wasn't much other than a couple of lights, that TV, and a small water pump to the lake. Now anyway, I was young and X-Files was spooky to me. During one of the episodes, we both heard that humming coming from outside, like when we were on the canoe. It was faint, but definitely there. We went outside with a flashlight to see if we could identify it, but couldn't see anything. We didn't want to go into the woods this time, or take the canoe out, and it sounded like it was far enough away. But we just went back inside. Now, it was kind of intermittent throughout the rest of the night, sometimes louder and sometimes quieter. In the morning, our water wasn't working, and my dad went to investigate. Apparently, the pump power cable had been messed with, and it wasn't easy to fix, but weirdly strange. Now, This one is probably the most unsettling that I remember. I'd wake up earlier than everyone else most mornings because I get pretty hyped up to go out and catch toads and frogs and whatever else I can find. I even set a trap for a chipmunk one time and successfully capture it. I remembered one morning I'd just woken up before sunrise and was still in bed. Now, in the window adjacent to my bed, I see something that usually wasn't there. Now, it was half a face poking around the edge of the window staring at us, sickly pale orange with giant black eyes. This thing was definitely not human. I hid under the covers and eventually went back to sleep. When I woke up, everyone was awake, and there's no sign of anything being there. I always thought that this particular experience was just something I imagined, but about a month ago I met up with my dad while visiting my home city. We got talking about this trip a bit again, and he mentioned that quite a few times he felt uneasy on this trip. For example, my dad will usually go on jogs early in the morning. It's still a bit of a habit of his. He decided to abstain a couple of months and just stay in the morning in the cabin because there was something that he just couldn't describe and made him feel unwelcome there. I only connect this window with the incident after our conversation, but when I did, it really made me think about the entire trip and the one reason I decided to write a post about it. Now, I'm going to end this here because it's gotten longer than I expected, but I was a little kid when these things happened, but I know what I saw, and my dad certainly knows what he saw too, and I don't know, I just think everything's somehow connected. Now, sort of not related, but I was out in the country lands of Texas on this remote trail mountain biking that I like to ride when I'm in town. While riding though, I saw an older man ahead strangely, but I remembered he was looking straight up at the sky. I see him about 60 yards ahead. It's a single track, so I don't have room to get around him. I simply stop and he hears me brake, and he then turns around with his head level and looking at me. What happened next made my skin crawl. He starts talking and waving his arms, but his voice sounds different from how he looks. It sounds like a child talking and sounding scared, but obviously he's 50 plus years old. He keeps talking, but it's like somebody's playing a recording from his body with his arm animations and mouth not lining up correctly to the things that he's saying. I turn around and book it back to where I parked my car and left quickly. He could have just been a wildernessy loony with a child's voice, but I don't know, something about it was just off, and he also doesn't have any gear or clothes that match a hiker whatsoever. Now this has been going on for a couple of years now, but it hasn't gotten to me until now. I work as a paddling coach in Canada. I coach canoe and kayak, dragon boat, standing up paddleboard and an assortment of other boats. I work year round, but when the water opens up, I work at a camp which is about 10 minutes from the city. The club is surrounded by deep woods and several other camps, and the plot of land next to me where I work is owned by some other facilities, but the camp only takes up about a quarter of the area. The rest of the forest is filled up with a spider web of deep woods that go on for really far. I used to train my athletes on the trail, but for a couple of years we weren't able to do it. Anyway, we go on the trails now every so often. It all started about 2 years ago. I was up the river coaching a dragon boat session. We were paddling along the side of the shoreline, and just as we're taking a break, I hear the most bone-chilling scream that I've ever heard coming from the woods not far from the shore. It sounded like a woman's, but sounded off, like really off, as though that she was struggling to get air or something. The whole boat stopped moving and stopped to listen. It was quiet for a long time until I asked, did anybody else hear that? A dragon boat holds 22 people, and Just as I asked if everybody saw that, people nod at me. People were quiet for a while to see if it would happen again. This is the first incident that happened late in the summer, so I assure and assume that it was just a kid screaming at a bug or something. It happens. When we didn't hear it again, we decided to continue the workout. Just as we go out, however, it happened again. Still the same gargling scream just beyond the tree line. Again, everybody in the boat stopped and listened. Now I actually wasn't 100% sure what to do. I had never dealt with anything like this before. It was one of those things that you question constantly, not sure if what you heard was legit or not. I beached a dragon boat on the shore just so we can take a look. Everyone was guessing what the source of the scream is, and could not be going much further than the tree line, we presumed. A couple of the guys and me took a look around but can't see anything, and it was honestly a really chilling situation. We eventually all decided to call it a day and head back, and I assumed it was just a campground hiking in the trails, and it eventually left my mind. Flash forward to last summer. I heard the screams once again, but only a handful of times over the season. I can't say how many times, but it could have been more than 3. Each time it would happen, me and whoever it was there would try and figure out where this is coming from. This happened all over the summer. It was never just one part of the season. I wanted to say that this wasn't the only weird thing happening at the club. Besides the odd disembodied screaming, myself and others would hear a few different sounds coming from the woods by the club. This would include a weird rasping wind blowing through the forest immediately, followed up by the sound of what can only be described as somebody gutting a fish very loudly. It's so hard to explain, but I want to do the sound justice because it chilled me to the bone. The worst thing I've experienced at work is somewhat too common nowadays. It usually happens when I have a younger trainer with me. With this group, I coach mostly sprint canoe and sprint kayak, and the group ranges from 12 to 17. I train the kids after school, and sometimes we go late before the sun sets. Sometimes I'm stuck closing up the club in the dark with the kids, which usually is when this happens. From time to time, when it's just a couple of us out after dark, me and my athletes hear footsteps coming from the woods around us. They always stop just short of the tree line. It doesn't sound like somebody running through the trails or anything, but as if someone is walking through the underbrush. Just as we hear it, me and the kids always fall silent to the exact same place. This usually prompts everybody to drop whatever they're doing and hightail it out to the parking lot to drive off. Now, all of this would have been fine. I'm a tough guy, and I don't scare easily. At least I don't think so, but a couple of days ago, something finally put me over the edge. It's been an exceptionally warm spring in Canada, which has allowed me to start working on the water 3 to 4 weeks earlier than usual. I was out on the water with a dragon boat crew, and we're paddling up and down, and it happened. Now, the scream sounded different now, still female but really demonic. All of the hairs on the back of my body stand up. The whole boat laughed awkwardly, assuming it's just another member from the club, or maybe just a member taking the hiking trails, but I didn't laugh. It hit me almost immediately. It could not have been another member of the club because I was the last there, and it couldn't have been any members of the other clubs because it's too early in their season. Theirs hasn't opened up yet. That was the other night, and I haven't decided what to do. The whole thing has put me on edge, and I haven't allowed myself to stay later than roughly about 8 these last couple of days. I'm not a usual on these kinds of places, but I've spoke to some other people and coaches about the screams who have also heard them, and none of us know what to think about it. Now, the screams usually come a couple of times in the summer, usually in 2s, but I'll try and record it next time. Now, my mum is a psychic medium and has always told me about her fairy haunting stories. I never really believed her, and thought she was mistaken lighting / bugs or fireflies for fairies, but last night she began talking about fairy hunting again, and I decided to go with her so I could experience what my mum had been speaking about. Now we're in Lilydale. They have a fairy trail in the woods, so at around 10:30 PM we head into the woods with flashlights. We get about half a mile into the woods and my mum turned off all the lights and starts talking and welcoming them in. At this point, I'm sketched out and feel super uncomfortable about being in the woods with no lights. I was expecting to see a bear, not really a fairy. I then almost instantly felt extremely calm and start to see these flashing lights around me. I grew up in New York and I know what a lighting bug looks like, but these aren't those. It was almost like sparks you see when you have a lighter. Whatever was making it was obviously flying because you could see them moving. My mum then tells me to look behind me, and the tree directly behind me almost looked like it had little patches glowing in the dark. They then began to flash light, and we would sing and ask questions. I don't really know what to make of this experience. I feel like it's almost like something I've never had in my life before. Another weird part about this that makes me believe we weren't seeing bugs is that we asked multiple questions like flash twice for yes, and every time we did we got a reply. There were about 2 minutes where we didn't see anything, and my mum asked them to show us their beautiful lights a few more times before we left. And they all started showing us the lights again. Thought I would share my weird experience, and I still don't really know what to make of it. Now, in Canada, we have a scout system similar to the US. Our system by level is Beavers, Cubs, Scouts and Venturers. This happened during Cubs, so there was this house on the property of the camp. It's a beautiful house, nice wooden smell, it was great. During this time, all the troops around us gathered for a weekend up in the house, so maybe 6 or 7 troops gathered. We'd be doing wooden car racing, etc. The house was split into 2 rooms, one for males and one for females, and the closest doors connects the 2 rooms. At the time, there was maybe 10 or 20 guys in one room and 10 to 15 females. Now we'd be sleeping on the floors basically, with our sleeping bags. Now after brushing, me and the guys went back to our room. We were talking and one of the kids said that this place is haunted, and that the closet that leads into the girls section is where somebody was hanged. Now I'm not gonna lie, I always had a strange feeling in that doorway, so much so in fact that I put my sleeping bag across the room on the other side away from it. There was also an air vent there, that I was afraid as well, so I then moved into the middle. Even if I had to sleep in between 2 guys, I didn't mind. That night, after the counsellor shushed us to sleep, because you know guys, we talk for hours on end and didn't get no sleep. Now it's maybe 4:30, I woke up, my head facing towards the closet when I noticed something going down. The closet door was slowly opening. I was kinda stunned. Girls shouldn't be peeping on guys. And then I see a shadow, no bigger than 6 feet. It was crazy tall for its size. Now, I can best describe from memory. It's like the colour Vanta black. It was very blurry but crisp until the middle. It slowly inched its way across the wooden floorboards and making no sound, nothing. It just silently passes each kid as it went by. I didn't want this thing to see me, so I turned my head. It passed more kids and went slowly down. I was now trembling. I didn't know what it wanted. It kept moving slowly, passing a few kids ahead of me, and then it happened. The more it got closer, the more I felt dread. Now not only did I feel dread, but I felt the air getting colder. And not just the physical feeling of cold, almost like my insides. The air was getting more cold and dry like liquid nitrogen. The greatest amount of that feeling happened when it passes me. I was maybe a few feet from the door, so When it went to the entrance I was terrified, and I literally saw it turning the doorknob. It pulled the door open slowly, exited before strangely enough shutting the door again. That morning when we were getting up from bed and walking down the rickety old steps, one of the kids says, "Did you see the shadow last night?" And maybe 4 of us said yeah. And we spoke about it for a short while and all agreed that everybody was in our sleeping bags and that nobody moved, and it couldn't have been any of us. I was camping in a little cottonwood canyon on October 11th of the last year with 5 of my buddies. We had a canyon party and it was super fun. The wind starts to pick up after the party goes on, and then eventually we get ready for bed. We're all sharing a tent and we're about 1.5 miles from the road heading up the canyon in a very secluded area, when around 2 to 3 we start to hear this mechanical like THS movie intro sound growing faster and faster. The bass got insane and it felt like something was coming. All of my friends heard the same thing and it scared the life out of us. Then, as the sound was reaching its peak, it went dead silent. Then this huge rush of wind hit us. Now the next morning we all woke up to this huge stone underneath the top of our tent, right where we'd been sleeping. We then got out of the tent and realised that the entire tent has actually been moved about 5 feet. It scared the life out of us. I'm not a big believer of the paranormal or even aliens for that matter, but this occurrence was the first time that I had no explanation for it. Now, there was 5 adults sleeping in that tent, and there's no way that it could have moved that far on flat land without us noticing. Until this day, I get goosebumps about that noise. I thought I was dying. The noise lasted for what felt like 2 minutes. Now, I was dead sober while my friends were a bit tipsy, but I really don't know what this was. It's honestly like the THX intro slowed down on full volume, but imagine hearing this in the middle of the woods. I was living in California and had a hobby of backpacking in the Sespe wilderness. I liked the adventure, I suppose. There is everything out there from bear to Mexican cartel drug grows, but I wasn't ready for what I found. The wilderness is huge, over 200,000 acres. You could walk for days and never see anyone. On this trip, I was going out for 3 days. I'm a young man, mid-20s, and I was going with a lifelong friend, Tom, who's in his 40s. I've known him all my life. So one sunny Friday afternoon, we meet up after work and hit the trail. The trip was going well, until the second day had come. Camp is set up and we're hiking along a creek after breakfast. Creeks are nice for hiking because they let you get off the beaten trail, but it's hard to get lost. Anyway, Tom and I are hiking along the creek when we saw a cabin. Not a log cabin, but an almost large shed. Being that we're on public land, we knew it had to be one of the very few forest ranger outposts. When we approach a cabin, we announce ourselves but don't get a reply. We then see a large water reservoir next to the cabin, so we get some water and knock on the door. We walk 2 steps, stand on the small porch and knock on the door. The door swung in when Tom knocked. There was no one home. It was obvious that a ranger did not live here. There's a kitchen area. No one home. There's a Nazi flag. And a desk and book. We went in and everything was very clean, but worn. We look around. Tom walked over to a closet near the bed while I snooped through the desk. There were some white power books, Arcanist cookbook, and some other things on the shelves. On the desk I found the most interesting thing of all. It was a double-edged axe head. Engraved on it was, "I was there and not you," and the date is 1983. I showed the axe head to Tom and asked him, "What's in the closet?" and he said nothing but combat figures, a Ziploc bag full of blonde hair. At that time, we knew we had to leave. I turned to the door and held the axe in my hand. I wondered what it meant. I think it's weird too because I have blonde hair. Now, I put it back on the desk. I see what appears to be blood in the corner. It's old dried blood, but definitely blood. Now after camping, we go and make some food. That night, we traded man stories and I climb into my sleeping bag. It's a beautiful night under the stars. In the morning, I wake up. I can feel a weight on my chest. I look down and see a stack of things on my chest. It was my wallet, my ID, and some writing that said, 83, you better run. Needless to say, we got out of there and never come back again. This encounter happened when I was about 12 or 13. And with my best friend who is 3 years younger than me. The town we grew up in was incredibly safe, and it was very unusual for us to ever feel unsafe for the most part. The two of us often hung out in the local park down the street from our home. The park is quite large and open and backed onto an overgrown field and a small little wilderness type area. On this particular day, we were hanging out on top of a giant metal slide which had a great view of the whole park and the field that lied at the back of it. We're sitting there chatting away, and I noticed something blue along the tree line between the field and wilderness. I notice it move closer and figure it's someone walking a dog or something in the field. The figure just stands there for a while, not moving, just standing perfectly still. I start getting a little creeped out and point out the person to my friend. She starts yelling at the person, "Hey, Smurf man, we aren't afraid of you," because she's an idiot. Suddenly the figure starts moving towards us, getting closer, moving quite fast now. We freak out and hightail it home as fast as we can. That afternoon, I'm out delivering my newspapers and I walk past the park and can still see a blue figure now in the park, but still far back. It seems like we're being followed. The next day, as I'm preparing my newspapers, I read one article and see someone escaped from prison and attempted to abduct a young girl. He's then described as wearing a blue windbreaker, blue cap, and blue jeans, considered dangerous. A shiver now ran through my entire body because I know that's who was stalking us. I told my mum and she thought I was nuts because the guy had escaped from prison a few towns over and it seems impossible for him to have travelled that far. She called the police to give the tip anyway. They also seemed skeptical that he'd be out of town. However, a few days later he's apprehended in a different park in our town trying to abduct another girl. It is by far the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me. I still get awful vibes when I stand in parks on my own. This happened to me over 30 years ago, but I still remember the feeling of fear as though it were yesterday. I was in college, female, and taking a course in outdoor survival. The course ended with a 3-day, 3-night wilderness solo. We were allowed to take a backpack, empty canteen, sleeping bag, knife, 6 matches, rope, a sheet of plastic, clothes, extra stocks, Halzone tablets, small cooking pot and spoon. No forks. We're not allowed to bring food or water since part of our training is identifying edibles and finding a water source. Once I was dropped off, I had to hike to find a spot to set up camp. First I had to place a flag on a tree near my drop-off point so that I could be located 3 days later. Now I'm loving life, just me and nature. I had no fears. Even as night began to fall, I enjoyed the sounds of the woods all around me and didn't mind not having a tent. I built a small fire, had a great feeling of peace. I slept well, but woke up thirsty. My search for water began. Happily, I found a muddy stream, let the water settle in my pot, place the tablets in and boil it. And it had a crappy taste, but at least I'm hydrated now. All went well. I have a great time until my last day. It was early in the afternoon. I clear up my camp, hiking out to my drop-off location. As I sat there, leant up against a tree, I heard the sound of a vehicle off in the distance. I figured that it had to be my pickup. Now as I'm waiting, a vehicle that I've never seen before pulls up in front of me. Immediately I realise that I do not know the man driving. He gives me an odd look. My gut tells me it's bad news. He says, "Hey, what are you doing there? And am I alone?" I then said, "Well, my friends are breaking camp behind me." He then gave me a wink, got into his vehicle and rode off. He then stopped, looked as though he's gonna come around. I didn't bother looking back. I was terrified. I knew I had to hide. I can hear his engine start. I ran into the woods and hid. As I ran, I hear him come past where I was originally standing. I stay quiet and remain hidden. I can hear him calling out to me walking through the brush. I'm so afraid. He says I'm gonna regret this and that he's coming back with more. I hear the car door slam, the engine start and him pull away. Going back to my drop-off point is now not an option, so I began hiking through the woods, hoping I would find base camp. After walking for what felt like hours, I see a forest ranger. I told him who I was and what happened to me. He told me I'd done the right thing because a young girl had been brutally attacked the night before, and the police and forest service had been searching the area. Luckily he drove me to the base camp where I learnt that another girl in my class had another encounter with that guy, but also ran away. If there's anything to be learned from this, it's sure to always trust your gut and never camp alone. My friends and I decided to go camping one spring break. We had planned a week in advance, and as the day got closer, the weather turns worse. It's cold and grey, unheard of for Kansas. The night finally came along with yet another cold front. It was in the 30s, but we had dressed warm, stocked up on whiskey and beer. The plan was to hit a spot that we knew about. It's barely accessible by a 4x4. We wanted to really camp, none of those designated sites for families and seniors in RVs. We aim to be very far away from civilization, which was only made up by a single spotlight and a couple of hundred people that drove into the woods. After 30 minutes of bone-rattling dips across dry creek beds and detours around trees, it starts to rain. By the time we find camp, it turns to hell. The spot was marked by an ancient dirt road with a few hundred feet of log-in roads and rotting carcasses. That night, we pass a bottle round, hoping we'd figure out the tents before we're too drunk. Eventually we do, and manage to start a fire with diesel. At this point the howl had stopped, and the empty whiskey bottle lay broken in the fire, and we had a decent pile of empty growing. We drank, played cards, and passed out in our tents. The next morning I gradually regained consciousness to the sound of something large being dragged past my tent. It was what looked to have once been a station wagon, stripped and rust covered, dragging the VW with a chain. The VW had been there for so long that the floor had rotted out, and roots had tied it to the forest floor. They lay scattered in the wake of the wagon. A woman is driving, a man's beside her, and 3 shirtless kids sat in the back where there used to be seats. The man stared out of the window away from us the whole time. The children had dirt smeared on their faces, which illuminates part of them, and you can see their 1,000-mile stares. It's really weird. I don't like it. It's a look of crushing poverty that you've only seen in pictures, existing in war-torn countries. The projects in inner cities and deep south. They then start talking to us. You'll come from the city to do some camping. Well, that's fine as long as you ain't doing no drugs. You ain't doing drugs, are ya? Now we aren't. They say just drinking then. Hell, I like a drink now and then my darn self. That's fine, that's just... You'll want to know something about here. Have you seen them black helicopters flying around? Then some boys at work for me. This is my land, and they told me that you can't be too careful, so I figured I'd check it out. She then begins laughing. She then says, "You'll know Bethany?" We don't. Everyone knows her. You'll go church. I lie and say yes. She says, "Good. I ain't got no time for those that don't fear God. Why don't you come to the church tomorrow? It's in the basement. You can meet Bethany. It's just over there up the hill. You can't miss it." Boy, sure she'd like to meet you all. They all would. We assure her we would. She drove away into the trees, slowly dragging the VW. As soon as she left, we all look at each other and start laughing. Very nervously. We all have the remnants of a primitive warning system for danger. It's been eroded by living safe and civilized, but every once in a while, you know when something's wrong. I mean, everything about this situation's just wrong, and we're miles away from help. I mean, heck, this is the only person we've seen out here, and we definitely don't want to go into the basement for whatever lied there for us. We decide right then and there to pack up and leave and never come back again. Hello everyone. I'm very unwell at the minute, so sorry I've not been able to upload much this week. I am on the up though, and should be back to normal in the following days. Let me know what kind of stories you'd like to see me do. Hope you'll enjoy this video. Let's begin. This is actually my stepmom / her best friend story. Now my stepmom, we'll call her Mancy, grew up as kind of a privileged teen in the 70s. Her mum and her family had moved over here, the States, from England when she's about 9. She went to a pretty nice high school in a really nice town. There, she made friends with a girl Lily. who didn't exactly run with Nancy's type of crowd. They hit it off, and Lily would take Nancy out to do her type of stuff: hiking, fishing and sailing. Anyway, because of Lily's influence, the two of them would go and do stuff like that a good amount. One Sunday, they decide to hike in some hills about an hour away. Nancy then puts on what I'm sure were her extremely expensive hiking shoes, and the two of them drove off to the hiking trails. Lily parked in the big clearing with the makeshift parking spots, but there's no other cars there. This was only important in hindsight. They started hiking up the hill, off the path, because Lily fancied herself as a badass. This hiking was nothing extraordinary. Anyway, they reach the top of the hill and my stepmom is done. The polished, pampered side of her was coming out and she groaned until Lily said okay, they're gonna rest, then walk, but slower. They had started down the hill for maybe only 10 minutes when Nancy started moaning again. Lily conceded to walking down the side of the road instead of the rough hiking trail Prior picked. So there they are, probably looking like a couple of tools geared up for some hiking and walking down a crappy road. And after not even 5 minutes, a truck pulled up next to them. It's red and rusty, and just generally looks like a clunker. The guy rolled down the window, and the girls look in through the passenger side window. He had a big beard, baseball cap pulled down, long brown hair. He greeted them, even smiling through his beard, asking if they needed a ride. Nancy describes him as charming, even cute. Lily still says the moment he greeted them, chills went up her spine. But despite her better judgment, my stepmom convinces her to get in the truck, saying it's only going to be a 10-minute drive tops. The two girls now open the passenger side door to the old rusty thing, the guy directing them to the back seat. They settle in, and the truck goes forward. Lily always says this is a point when it hit her that they made a big mistake. The back seat was clean enough, but there's rope on the floor, and 4 boxes of saran wrap hanging out from under the passenger seat. It seems kind of creepy but weird. Very out of place. But Lily didn't want to freak out my stepmom, keeping quiet. After 10 minutes, the woods don't look any clearer. They hadn't seen another car the whole time. Lily asking how long he thought it'd be. He said he's going to take a different route down the hill and had to stop somewhere first. That was it. Now the girls were about 18 at the time and Lily didn't want to press the issue. She was scared. Now she could remember his hair because she'd sitting behind him. It was very tangled and dirty. She noticed crusted mud on his collar. Trying to find something identifiable about him, getting scared the more she picks up on details. He was youngish, strong looking, had a 1 on both of them, so they didn't ask any more questions, and he didn't offer any information and they drove on. Several minutes after that, they reach a tiny shack/log cabin looking place right in a clearing. There was an old stump where someone had been cutting wood down with a huge axe and with a log. Lily's on red alert now. The guy turned off the truck and slipped out saying, "I'll be right back, don't get out," and he goes to the house. Lily tried to speak to my stepmom about how incredibly uncomfortable she is, but she mostly dismisses it. Lily begins laughing, increasingly freaked out, finally putting her foot down, demanding Nancy exits the truck with her. So when they get out and walk around the front of the vehicle, they're now found to be about 50 yards away from the house. The guy would have left 2 young girls in the truck alone while going into his house. So they wander around, looking at it hesitantly. If the guy's really decent, he is just giving us a ride, then it'd be super rude for us to run off, right? My stepmom had this strict upbringing when it comes to manners and public persona, and she saw it as an issue of that nature. So she actually started to head back to the truck, opening the front door to climb in the driver's seat. Lily's mad now though, and yells at her. Oh, the driver's side door. Just under it, by the seat, you can see a big hatchet. It's covered in red and brown stains, like the floor. Lily's uncomfortable and starts losing it. My stepmom starts getting hysterical. They decide to leave. They're gonna book it off to the side of the property, into the trees. They bumped around in the trees for a little while until Lily was fairly confident they're on their way back down the hill. My stepmom cried all the way down, Lily feeling bad about it, but completely freaked out. When they finally got back down to the bottom and saw the old wooden fence that surrounded the original parking area, they were relieved. As they got closer, they saw it. The truck, parked on the other side of the gravelly makeshift lot, just sitting there facing the other way innocently. They couldn't see if anyone's in it, and of course Mancy wanted to run for the car, but Lily's hesitant. She managed to calm down my stepmom, saying she wanted to wait before running out into the open to see what's out there. Remember, it's the 70s, no cell phones. There was no ranger station around or any park rangers. The parking lot was big and empty. Who knows what would have happened if they decided to stroll across it. Thankfully, Lily convinces my stepmom to chill, and the two of them hunker down against a big tree, hidden by bushes and the other trees, and waited it out for what seemed to be a couple of hours. When dark starts to fall, all the animals start coming out and making sounds, and my stepmom predictably started getting antsy and began bothering Lily, who was tired, and moves away, giving in. She was just planning their dash to the car when they hear a loud bang sound across the twilight lit lot. They watch as one of the back doors to the car swings open, and a bearded guy jumps out. He got out, shut the door, looking around for a few moments, then getting back in his truck. The truck lumbers past their car and out of sight. They can tell he's about to do a loop and come back. They wait until he's around a corner, then sprint into their cars, peeling out as fast as they can. They never went on expeditions like this again, but also never reported it to the authorities. Okay, so let me start by saying I'm a 23-year-old. At the time of this story, I was 19, 5'5", fat girl from England. My weight and country come into play later. So I would take my dog for walks at night. That was until this experience. Now, it's not the kind of dark where you can't see anything, but the kind where you can't make out much further in front of you. As a disclaimer, this is the middle of nowhere. We're in a village where everyone knows each other and strangers are rarely spotted. Now, a fair few of my neighbours walk late at night, and I meet most of them, and there's usually this 6'3", heavily tattooed 46-year-old man with two friendly big dogs, one Mastiff and another German Shepherd. We were great friends and still are. Now, on this particular night, I bumped into him, just ending his walk, which happened to be a couple of times, and it's no big worry. I'm around half an hour into my 45-minute walk in the woods, earphones in with music playing and just checking my phone to see what song's on next. I notice my dog is looking up as if he can see something. I assume it's another neighbour, fox or deer. I looked up calmly and I see a strange man standing about 20 foot away from me, holding a rifle. Not a dog, it It wasn't hunting season, and this is England, so you can't really get guns unless you're a farmer, let alone a rifle. He looks angry and stares at me. At this point, I remembered my head torch, and he turns to look at me. He angles himself to my face, and at this point, I know I couldn't turn around or run since I'm out of shape. I carry on walking. As we go past, my dog gives him a wide berth, which is very unusual because he's normally friendly and loves everyone. I'm very confused by this. Now, I shuffle past him and say evening. I try and speed walk out of there. I look over my shoulder as I'm about to leave the woods. I saw he hasn't moved an inch and he's still staring at me. I never walked alone at night again. This freaked me out so much because it never happened since, and there's no hunters near me. I'm certain he was not meant to have that gun, and I'm sure I've heard a gun go off at some point around the time of my travels near then. Back in the early 90s, I was a kid, around 13 at the time of the incident. I used to stay at my grandparents' house a lot, out in a very rural area in SE, Arkansas. When I say very rural, I mean it was a series of networked dirt roads to get to their house. The closest neighbours besides my aunt and uncle, who lived about a quarter of a mile off a dirt road, was a mile away. This was very backwards and isolated from the rest of civilization. The closest town was a 10-mile trip away. It's in the middle of farmland and mostly woods. They had lived up in this house since my mum was a child and had both grown up a ways down the dirt road. Anyway, there was a general store roughly 3 or 4 miles down the network of dirt roads. Now this is your typical country dirt road shop. It's run by an old lady and her husband, and its customers only consisted of people who lived out there. Now one day, my grandmother said to me if I wanted to walk to the general store and get some milk, eggs and a few other miscellaneous items. I said sure. She gave me some money and I headed on my way. Now it was fairly early in the day and I had plenty of time to get back before dark, which I always made sure to do when I was out roaming. Things can get pretty creepy out in the backwoods of Arkansas after nightfall. It's a darkness unlike most people have actually experienced before, due to no light pollution, and not really many street lamps. Now me being a 13-year-old, had poor time management skills. I stopped at the bottom of a hill next to the small wooden bridge you have to cross and messed around at the creek creating crawdads and such. By the time I left the store, I realised it was quickly approaching night. This was fall and darkness set upon the land very early. I didn't want to be walking these lonely roads, especially not through the woods, so I go as quick as I can. I'm running and sprinting as much as possible, but it's not enough. By the time I'd made it back to the bottom of the hill near the ridge, it's almost completely dark, and there was an eerie sort of glow brought about by a very bright, nearly full moon that was rising. At the top of the hill was a road that's perfectly straight and flat, with the woods on the left side and a large hill on the right. About half a mile up from the top of the hill is my grandparents' house, and you can see it from there. As I top the hill, I can see the faint glow of lights at their house. I'm starting to feel a little bit better now, but I'm still not feeling very good. The field on the right was somewhat illuminated by the glow of the moon, and my eyes have only just adjusted to the darkness. As I walk up the road, I hear something from the left, behind me on the wooded side of the road. It sounded like leaves being rustled. I turned around and see nothing at first, but then, as my eyes began to focus, I see something in the ditch, a black shadowy shape slowly moving towards me. At first I think it's a dog, but then I realise it's way too large to be one. And then I realised it wasn't actually walking on 4 legs, it was kind of crawling, like a person. I stared for a moment, out of sheer confusement, trying to figure out what I was seeing, and then a jolt of fear shudders me as it dawns on me. Whatever this thing was had been trying to sneak up on me for a while. At that exact moment, this thing stood upright out of the ditch on its 2 feet like a normal person. It had the shape of a human, but long arms, legs and such. It stood roughly 7 to 8 feet in height and was completely covered in black or maybe dark brown hair. Its face is dark in colour, and I can't really recall seeing much in the way of features. It was no bear, that's for certain, or any other kind of animal that I know for that matter. I immediately dropped the bag of stuff I'd been carrying and bolted as fast as I could, trying to get towards my grandparents' house. I heard a heavy breathing and weird sound behind me, hearing footsteps on the gravel as whatever this thing is starts to chase me. Now, I didn't turn around to look because I didn't need to. I can hear it crashing into the woods, earth-shattering, and some ungodly scream coming out of that thing, a sound I've never heard before. By the time I reached my grandparents, my heart felt as though it was about to explode from my chest. It's a type of adrenaline that I've never had before. I must have been sprinting as fast as possible for half a mile. I flew into the house and, in an incoherent mess of hyperactive gibberish, tried to explain to my grandparents what happened. My grandmother didn't really seem to believe me, but did believe something scared me, which annoyed me, thinking it was some kind of dog. The next morning I woke up, and I can see my grandpa sitting outside on the porch, whittling wood underneath the shaded tree in front of the yard, as he often does. I went and sat down beside him in one of the old metal lawn chairs. He's a very rational man, down to earth, grown up and hunted in that area his entire life. He knew every square inch of it, mapped out into his mind. He knew every type of critter and creature that lived in the woods, what noises they made, where to find them and how to catch them, etc. I'd only been hunting with him for a couple of years, but had been going out into these woods with him since I was pretty young, going on walks and such. He had passed a lot of knowledge down to me during those adventures. I spoke to him about what happened, and told him I knew what I saw. I wasn't being over exaggerative, and it wasn't due to my imagination. I wasn't making it up. And it definitely wasn't a dog. He knew that I wasn't some dumb 13-year-old kid. He knew what I saw was real. He stopped whittling, looked me right in the eyes and said, "I know what you saw. I've seen it there before too. There's something out in them woods that people don't understand, and that's someone that you don't want to mess with." I remember those words very clearly to those days, because it gave me affirmation, but at the same time made me realise that whatever I'd seen was very real in existence, and beyond my understanding. My grandpa then went on to tell me that far back in the woods, there are some cliffs at the bottom of these cliffs in a cave. He told me that cave is where the creature lived. He once stumbled upon it a long time ago while hunting. He said he was standing on the top of the cliff looking at the creature fitting the same description, and it emerged and began to scream, throwing rocks at him. He said he took a shot at it, missed, and then this thing chased him. My grandpa was on top of the cliff, so in order to get back, he had to run a distance, but luckily he managed to put some good space between them. He said the whole way back home, he felt as though he was being watched, and kept hearing twigs snap behind him. He was certain that it was following him, stalking him. He made it home, and as he reached his front porch, he turns to look towards the trees, and he can see this thing peeking out behind a tree staring at him. Later that night, he said that my grandmother awoke in the early hours of morning to find large rocks being thrown at the house, as well as hearing an unholy sound screeching out of the creature. He said he could hear it walking around on the front porch, rattling the doorknobs, banging on the windows, and it sounded like it was muttering to itself in a low, deep voice. But it didn't sound like a normal language, just a bunch of gibberish. After a while, that thing went back to throwing some more rocks and howling. So my grandpa grabbed his shotgun and fired it off, and into the darkness where this thing's running into the woods. Now, he didn't know if he'd hit it or not. He said that was the last time he ever saw or heard from it. However, over the years, farmers would report cows being mutilated, or someone's hunting dog would go unexplainably missing, or somebody would have a story about some strange creature they'd seen. He said it only scared my grandmother beyond words, and she absolutely refused to talk about it ever or even acknowledge that it happened, which explains her acting weird about it when I told her. I know it's a pretty far-fetched story, but please believe me, this is true. And till this day, I've never actually spoken of it to anyone other than my grandpa.